I thought I knew everything about my life, but I was wrong. I came home early that day expecting love, but instead, I found death waiting for me. The bullet wasn't the worst part. Discovering who was behind it was. My wife, the woman I trusted, was in on it. She watched me bleed, praying I'd die. But fate had other plans. I survived, and now, every breath I take fuels my desire for revenge. I'll make them both pay, and they'll regret the day they ever crossed me. This isn't just about betrayal. It's about justice. I felt happy as I gathered my bags and walked upstairs. I had just wrapped up a big project in Dallas a day early, which meant I could come home sooner than I thought. I was thinking about what fun things I could do with Nikki that night as I reached the landing and prepared to take the last 5 steps. But when I looked up, I saw a man standing at the top of the stairs. What shocked me the most was the gun he was holding. I looked at the gun for a second and then saw a bright light. It felt like I was pushed back down the stairs. Then everything went dark. I wasn't sure where I was. Suddenly I was in a bed in a place I didn't know. It took me a moment to understand that this was not my bed, and I had no clue where I was. The room was mostly dark, but I could hear someone softly speaking nearby. I tried to move, but I couldn't. All I could do was turn my head a little. My mind was wandering, and I couldn't concentrate on anything until I heard Nikki's voice. She was by the door, talking to a man I couldn't see because he was turned away from me. They didn't know I was awake, so I listened closely to try to catch their conversation. "What did the doctor say?" the man asked. "He said Eric is improving, but he is not completely safe yet," Nikki replied. "Doctor? Was Nikki talking about me? What did she mean by not being safe?" I tried to understand what I just heard, but nothing made sense. Nikki was gripping the man's arm while trying to guide him toward the door. "John, you really shouldn't be here," she said to him. "Does he remember what went on?" "I'm not sure." Detective Trenka tried to ask him about it yesterday, but Eric was too out of it from the painkillers to respond, Nikki said. "I want to hear what he tells the police as soon as he can talk." "John, please go before he wakes up and sees you. Also, Detective Trenka might return any minute." "All right, I'm leaving, but just remember what I told you." "I will. Now please go." "I just can't handle this right now," Nikki said. I was trying to figure out what Nikki and the man were discussing. She called him John, but that name didn't mean much to me. Nikki glanced my way, so I shut my eyes. When I opened them again, the man was gone, and Nikki was sitting in a chair in front of a dark window. Suddenly, I wasn't sure if the man had been real or if I had imagined him. I was getting ready to ask Nikki where I was and who the man beside me was, but I was so tired that I could barely keep my eyes open. I thought it would be best to close my eyes for a moment. After that, I would ask Nikki to explain everything. When I opened my eyes again, it was morning. I found myself looking at the white ceiling tiles above me. The room was calm, but I could tell there were other people around. I turned my head to the right as much as I could, but I didn't get very far. It was just a small gap, maybe 3 or 4 inches, but it let me see Nikki by the window. The sunlight shining behind her made it hard to see her face well. I could tell her eyes were puffy, like she had been crying, and she held a tissue in her hand. While I watched her, Nikki turned away from me and stared out the window. She seemed unaware that I was awake. I turned my head to the left, but like before, I couldn't see much. However, I did spot the guy who wouldn't stop asking me questions I couldn't answer. I wasn't sure if the questions were from a memory or just a dream. He stood about 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed around 165 pounds. His curly brown hair was almost the same color as the suit he was wearing. That suit! He looked like he had been wearing that suit every day for 5 years. The elbows were frayed, the pockets were torn, and the big blue tie he had on was old-fashioned and didn't match the suit very well. I was confused because I recognized him right away, but I couldn't remember his name. I had a fuzzy memory of him asking me some questions before, but I couldn't recall what those questions were or why he had asked me. When I first saw him, the name Curly came to mind. I wasn't sure if that was really his name or if I just thought of it because of his curly hair. He was standing by the wall reading a newspaper. When he began to lower the paper and look over it, I quickly shut my eyes and pretended to sleep. I really didn't want to talk at that moment. While pretending to be asleep, I must have actually dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, the room was empty. Nikki and Curly had left and it was dark outside. I must have dozed off again. I felt annoyed with myself for sleeping for so long. I had wanted to chat with Nikki. I remembered I wanted to ask her something, but I couldn't recall what it was. I stayed quiet and listened, trying to understand what was happening. Slowly, I began to get my thoughts together. I knew I was in the hospital, but I wasn't sure how long I had been there or why I was there at all. I remembered seeing Nikki by the window a few times. I also remembered Curly asking me questions at least once, and leaning against the wall more than once, too. I couldn't tell if all of this happened in one day or spread out over a few days. It worried me that I didn't know how long I had been in the hospital or why I was there. The room was quiet, which helped me focus. I tried to think back to the last clear memory I had. I lay quietly and let my thoughts wander. Suddenly, a memory came to me. I remembered coming back from a project in Dallas. I had walked into my house with my bags. I think I put my bags down in the front hallway. But then, what did I do next? I couldn't recall. Did I go to the kitchen? Did I use the bathroom? That must be it, I thought. I was in a rush to get home, so I probably really needed to use the restroom. I wasn't entirely sure if that was correct, but it made sense to me. I remember grabbing my bags again and starting up the stairs. When I turned right at the landing to go up the next set of stairs, I saw someone standing at the top. Now I recalled him. He was a tall man with dark brown hair, but I didn't see his face because my eyes were drawn to something else. I was looking at the gun he was aiming at me. I looked at it for what felt like a long time, but it was really just a few seconds, and then I saw a flash. I felt myself tumbling backward down the stairs when I heard the loud bang from the gun. After that, everything became a blur. I could barely remember waking up in the hospital. Nikki was there, holding my hand and crying. It all felt hazy, like it might have been a dream. I wasn't sure what was real anymore. When I saw Nikki again, she didn't look well. Her face was very pale and her eyes were red and swollen. She walked over to the bed and held my hand, then kissed my forehead softly. "Nikki, are you okay?" I asked. "You look a little off." I was surprised by how my voice sounded. It was rough and soft. "I haven't been able to sleep," she replied. "I was so worried that I might lose you." "The doctor just told me that you are okay now and should get better soon." "How long have I been here?" I asked. "Since Friday." "I know that it's been since Friday, but what day is it today?" "It's Tuesday," Nikki replied. "I missed 3 days," I said. "How do you feel today?" Nikki asked. "I'm not sure. I can't feel much at the moment. My mind is clear and I hope it stays this way." "Before, everything felt blurry," I said. "What happened to me?" I asked, confused. "You don't remember?" Nikki replied, looking surprised. "I only remember a little," I told her. Nikki opened her mouth to speak, but a man's voice interrupted us. "Let me fill Mr. Anderson in on what happened," the voice said. I looked to see who it was. It was Curly. He walked into the room right when I asked Nikki my question and stood next to her. Curly still had on the same brown suit. "Who are you?" I asked. "You don't remember?" he replied. "I remember you asking me questions, but I don't recall your name or what you asked about," I said. "I'm Detective Tony Trenka. I'm in charge of this case," he said. "What's the case about?" I asked. "This is what we know so far," Detective Trenka said. "You got home from Dallas on Friday, around noon. When you came home, you realized a break-in was happening. The details about how many people were there are still unclear. You were bringing your bags up the stairs when someone at the top shot you 3 times in the chest and stomach. Mrs. Anderson arrived at about 12:25 and saw you lying at the bottom of the stairs. She called 911 right away when she saw you. It seems that the burglar or burglars ran away soon after you were shot. They likely feared that someone had heard the gunfire. You were quite fortunate in 2 ways. First, the attacker used a small .32 caliber pistol. This is a big reason you are still alive. A .32 does not cause as much harm as a .38 or a 9mm gun. The second piece of good luck was that your wife returned home for lunch. If she hadn't found you when she did and asked for help, you would have lost a lot of blood and might not be here now. I held Nikki's hand tightly and smiled at her. "What can you say to your wife after she saved you?" Just saying thank you feels too small. I turned back to the detective. Do you know who could have done this? I asked. There have been a number of break-ins lately around Sherman Oaks. They have been going into houses during the day while the owners are at work, he said. This is the first time things have turned violent. We hope that in the chaos after the shooting, they may have made a mistake and left behind something that will help us find them. I think you were shot because you saw at least one of them. They probably thought you were dead or they would have made sure of it. I want to ask you again what you remember about Friday, Detective Trenka said. I told Detective Trenka that all I remembered was carrying my bags up the stairs. When I turned around at the landing, I saw someone at the top of the stairs. I told him that the man was big and had dark brown hair, but I couldn't see his face because I was focused on the gun. I told him that I didn't remember anything after the first shot was fired. You might have seen his face, Detective Trenka said, but seeing the gun scared you, so that's all you can remember right now. With time, I think you will recall what he looks like, and maybe you can describe him to us. I hope so, I replied. I'll give you two some time alone now, Detective Trenka said. I'll come by tomorrow to check if you remember anything else. I looked at Nikki and said, Thanks for helping me, kid. Nikki started crying and bent down to kiss my cheeks many times. Eric, I don't know what I would have done if I lost you, Nikki said. Suddenly, a scary thought hit me. It made my stomach feel tight, and I got a lump in my throat that I couldn't shake off. Nikki noticed the tears on my face and asked, What's wrong? Are you hurt? Yes, but not in my body, I replied. I just realized that if I hadn't come home when I did, you could have walked into the house and something terrible might have happened to you. Now, I don't feel so bad about what happened to me. I might have saved your life without even realizing it. Nikki held me tight, and I think we both shed some tears for a little bit. After that, I began to feel some soreness from my injuries. Nikki called for the nurse, and she came in to give me something for the pain. I slept for a little while, and when I woke up, Nikki was by the window reading a book. When she saw that I was awake, she came over to my bed and gave me a kiss. How do you feel? She asked. Do you need anything for the pain? I'm okay right now, I replied. Before I fell asleep, I wanted to ask you what was missing. What do you mean, what's missing? She asked. What did those guys take from our house? I asked. What did we lose? I don't know, Nikki said. They made a mess in the family room, but I haven't looked closely to see what's broken or missing yet. Why haven't you checked to see what was taken? I asked. I wasn't mad, just interested. I haven't gone back to the house since it happened. The police have been searching everywhere and I just couldn't be there. Walking in and seeing your blood on the floor at the bottom of the stairs, I just couldn't handle it. I've been living with my parents since this all happened. I understand. I'm sorry. I didn't think about it, I replied. I get why you wouldn't want to be there now. I guess we'll need to hire someone to help clean up the place. We can't do anything until the police let us back into the house. They say it's a crime scene. We have to wait until they finish their investigation before we can clean up. We don't need to rush. We can stay at my parents' house until we get the place cleaned up. While Nikki was there, we chatted about a lot of things, but we didn't talk about what happened on Friday. Later that night, after Nikki had gone home, I reflected on how close I was to losing everything and how close I was to losing Nikki, too. It could have been her who got shot instead. I tried to remember anything important about the shooting. Then, something else came to my mind that felt important. I wasn't sure if I was remembering it clearly, but every time I imagined the shooter, it looked the same. I really wanted Detective Trenka to visit the next day, so I could share my story with him. A little while later, the nurse entered and gave me something through my IV. I fell asleep very quickly. When I woke up in the morning, I felt a lot better. However, I still couldn't move in the bed. I started to worry. Were my injuries worse than what I had been told? At 8 o'clock, Nikki walked into the room. She gave me a kiss and said, I care about you, Eric. I care about you, too. Eric, I can't be here with you today, Nikki told me. School starts in 2 weeks and I have to go to meetings and prepare my classroom. I'll stay until the doctor comes, but then I have to go. I should be back around 4 o'clock. That's all right, my dear, I replied. I'll be okay. I might take a nap while you're away. Nikki chuckled. Take a nap? She asked. You mean you're in between naps? Yeah, all this napping is making me tired, I replied. I tried to laugh, but it hurt my chest. When Nikki saw the pained expression on my face, she began to cry. It's okay, Nikki. It just hurts when I laugh, so don't try to be funny, I told her. Nikki attempted to smile, but tears kept rolling down her cheeks. She reached into her purse for a tissue just as the doctor walked in. How are you feeling today, Mr. Anderson? The doctor asked. I'm not sure, I replied. I suppose I'm doing all right considering everything. I'm sorry, I know you told me your name before, but I can't recall it. You don't have to apologize, he replied. That's okay. I'm Dr. Berger. Berger, can you explain why I can't move my arms or legs and why I can only turn my head a little? I asked. We had to keep you still to prevent you from getting hurt again after your surgery, he replied. How bad is my condition? It is serious, but you are safe now. You were very fortunate, Dr. Berger said. I understand. Detective Trenka already mentioned that. If the gun had been more powerful, I might not be here, I said. I felt a wave of regret as soon as I saw Nikki's face go pale. That's true, I said, but you're very lucky about where the bullets hit you. One bullet went into the right side of your chest, just missing your ribs. It went through your lung and came out your back. The other 2 bullets hit your lower belly, but they didn't hit any important organs, which is a relief. Those 2 shots were the biggest worry. Thankfully, the bullets missed your liver and kidneys. They didn't really harm him much. How long will Eric be in the hospital? Nikki asked. I hope to have him out of bed this afternoon. If he keeps improving like he has, we might send him home on Monday. But Eric will need to rest for a few more weeks. I wouldn't advise him to return to work for at least 3 weeks, the doctor said. Berger said. When the doctor finished, Nikki said she was excited to bring me back home. I'll ask a nurse to help you during the day, and I'll be your nurse at night, she said. Nikki looked happier after talking to the doctor. She kissed me and said she would return around 4 o'clock, then she went out. I tried to sleep after Nikki left, but I just couldn't settle down. Later, a nurse came in and gently took off the straps that were keeping my arms and legs still. She also took away the foam cushion that had been holding my head in one spot. It felt amazing to finally move my arms and legs and to turn my head to see outside. I was watching some pigeons on the window ledge when Detective Trenka walked in. Do you feel any better today, Mr. Anderson? He asked. I think so, I replied. It's hard to say how I feel now compared to when I was all mixed up. I think this is better. I just wanted to check in and see if you remembered anything new that might help, he replied. Something came to me last night, but I'm not sure if it's a true memory, I said. Let's hear it. Last night I kept thinking about the shooting in my mind to see if anything new would show up. I remembered it the same way each time, but I noticed something that I might have seen but didn't really think about before. I still can't remember seeing the shooter's face, but I think he held the gun in his left hand. He had a ring on his middle finger, but it didn't look like a wedding ring. It was black, maybe made of onyx. Does that help? Yes, it does, Detective Trenka replied. Knowing that our shooter is likely left-handed and wears an onyx ring is very useful. It's not the same as a description of his face, but it's helpful. Is there anything else you remember? No. That's all I can remember. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I saw that Detective Trenka was still in that brown suit, and I nearly started to laugh. He caught my gaze and glanced down at his outfit. I see you noticed my new suit, he said with a smile. I don't usually dress this nicely. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stare. It's all right, he replied. We had a fire at the house, and I lost all my clothes. I'm really sorry to hear that, I replied. Did your house get hurt at all? No damage to the house. It was just my clothes that burned, he explained. For some reason, all my clothes were in a pile in the driveway when they got soaked with gasoline. Then someone accidentally dropped a match or a cigarette near them. Whoosh! Now, all I have left are a few burnt socks. I think my wife was really angry with me that night. He chuckled a bit and said, I believe we'll sort it out, but for now, I'm staying in my car. I had to get this suit from the Salvation Army. It's all I have to wear right now. I felt bad for him. Detective Trenka seemed like a good guy, and it hurt to think he was struggling in his marriage. What could he have done that made his wife so mad that she would get rid of his clothes? I suppose I always had a feeling deep down. I thought about how a marriage could go so wrong before people tried to make it right. Detective Trenka was with me for over an hour, but we mostly just talked. I felt like he had something on his mind, but he wasn't saying it. Finally, I decided to ask him directly. I feel like there's something you want to share with me, but you're holding back. What is it? I asked. Do you remember when I mentioned that the shooter believed you were dead, or he would have made sure you were? Detective Trenka said. Yes, I remember, I replied, waiting for him to explain more. The shooter knew you weren't actually dead, but he thought you would be soon. He wanted you to die, but he wanted it to be a slow process. That's why the last 2 shots were aimed at your stomach instead of your head, Detective Trenka explained. Why? I asked. Why would he do that? Is it because he thought I noticed him? I'm not sure, but I'm going to figure it out. After that, Detective Trenka asked me about my work and the people I was close to. It didn't hit me until he walked out that he might think the person who shot was someone I knew. In the days that followed, I grew stronger. The nurses helped me get out of bed and walk around the hospital. Nikki visited me every morning and then came back after work to have dinner with me. Every night, she stayed until visiting hours ended. A few times, when I felt lonely at night, I called Nikki at her parents' house and we talked for more than 30 minutes each time. Seeing Nikki every day started to make me anxious. I could feel myself getting better, but Nikki didn't seem to be improving. Her skin looked pale, and her eyes were often swollen and red. To me, it seemed like she had lost weight and wasn't getting enough rest. She had been through a tough time. When she found me lying on the floor with blood all around me, she didn't know if I would live or die for more than 3 days. This really affected her. I believed that once I left the hospital and we got back home, she would start to feel better. At night, when I was alone and couldn't sleep, all I thought about was Nikki. I remembered when we first met during our senior year at college. We met at a college party, but it wasn't the best situation. She was there as the date of one of my friends from the fraternity. He drank too much and was so wobbly that he asked me to take her home. When I first saw Nikki, she didn't look too happy with me or my friends. She didn't say much until I dropped her off, and then she just thanked me for the ride. But I was really impressed with Nicole Saunders. She was tall and slim with a nice figure. She had light brown hair and big, bright brown eyes. Her nose looked great on her face, and her big smile could light up a room. Sadly, she didn't smile at me during the ride to her sorority house that night. I remembered her smile from when she came to the party, and I felt a bit jealous of the person who came with her. I didn't see her again for 2 weeks. Then I bumped into her at another party. This time she smiled at me. "You're Eric Anderson, right?" she asked. "Yes, and you're Nicole Saunders." "You remembered my name. I'm impressed. I thought that after I was so rude to you when you drove me home, you would have forgotten all about me," she said. I took a moment to think about all the clever things I could say, but I decided to just be honest. I said, "I noticed how little you seemed to care about me, and that's why I remembered your name." "I did not care," she replied. "I was really upset with Bob. He asked me to a party and then got so drunk that he couldn't even drive me home. I think my anger made me act that way toward you. I really appreciate that you stayed sober and gave me a ride without fussing about leaving the party. I didn't want to miss this chance. How could I be upset about getting to spend time alone with a lovely girl like you?" Nikki laughed and replied, "Thanks, I suppose." "Have you made peace with Bob yet?" I asked. "Nope, and I don't plan to," she said. "I met him just last week, and that was our first and only date. He messed up. I was not impressed with him at all." "Great. So how about going out with me instead?" I asked. "I promise I'll stay sober long enough to drive you home." "I'd like that," Nikki replied. We went out on our first date the next night, and by the end of the week, we were only dating each other. I also remembered our first special moment. It was on our 4th date. We enjoyed some pizza and then went to see a movie together. After the movie, we drove back to Nikki's sorority house and I parked across the street. I kissed her gently and softly touched her ear. "I think I might be falling in love," I whispered to her. Nikki turned her head, kissed me back and said, "I feel the same." When I reached for Nikki's hand, she quickly held my wrist to stop me. The problem was that my car was very small and it was parked in the only spot on the street right under a bright street lamp. There were a lot of people walking by, which meant anyone could see us in the car. Not here. Let's go to my room, Nikki said. Come with me. Nikki buttoned her shirt and then stepped out of the car. I stepped outside and Nikki took my hand, leading me across the street to the sorority house. Instead of entering through the front, she guided me to the back door. We went inside and climbed the stairs to her room. When we reached Nikki's bedroom, I pulled her close and kissed her again. When Nikki and I were wrapped up in our embrace, I could feel a strong connection between us. We were sharing tender kisses, and I felt my heart racing. It was important to me to slow things down a bit. I gently pulled back, wanting to enjoy the moment without rushing. I could see that Nikki was pleased with what I was doing. It made me happy to see her smile and respond to my affection. Once I finished my gentle teasing, Nikki almost jumped at me. She showered my face with kisses, even though I was a bit messy from our playful time together. That night wasn't the best we ever had, but it was the most special because it was our first. I spent many quiet nights in the hospital just thinking about our life together. Nikki and I got married a year after we finished college. Nikki started teaching English at a high school in the Los Angeles County School District. I found a job with a company that sets up computer networks. Nikki and I have been married for 6 years. The trip to Dallas I just came back from was just the second time we've been away from each other. The first time was a bit more than a year ago at the end of the last school year. Nikki asked us to help out as chaperones for a school trip to Germany with the kids from the German club. I had to back out of the trip because I needed to go to a technology conference in Denver that same week. Nikki felt let down, but she knew I had to go. We were only away from each other for a week, but I missed her a lot. I arrived back home from the conference on Thursday night, and Nikki came back from Germany on Saturday. I lay in the hospital bed, thinking about the lovely evening we shared when Nikki got home. I had prepared a nice candlelight dinner for us. After we finished eating, we went to the bedroom. Nikki went to the bathroom to take a quick shower and get ready for me. While I waited for her, I lit some candles in the bedroom to create a warm and cozy atmosphere. I was excited as I sat there, anticipating her return. I could feel excitement growing inside me as I waited for what would happen next. It had been over a week since we had last shared a close moment. As Nikki walked toward me, I stood up and wrapped my arms around her. We began to dance to the soft rock music playing in the background. While we danced, I gently kissed Nikki on her lips and on her neck. I arranged us so that we were in front of the big mirror on Nikki's dresser. I stood behind her and wrapped my arms around her waist while she looked at her reflection. When I gently touched her side, Nikki leaned her head back against me and closed her eyes. It felt amazing as she showed me affection. Just when I thought I might reach a high point of joy, Nikki paused. She stood up and gave me a sweet kiss. I could still taste the moment we shared on her lips. When she pulled away from the kiss, she smiled and said, "Now it's my turn." Then she sat down on the edge of the bed. After that, while we hugged, Nikki said, "I brought you a surprise from Germany." She got out of bed and I watched her move as she walked over to her suitcase. She dug around inside until she found what she wanted. I felt a bit let down when she discovered the gift because I was really enjoying the sight of her bending over the suitcase. Nikki walked back to the bed and handed me a box that was not wrapped. She stood there with a big smile, waiting for me to guess what was inside. The box felt heavier than I thought, which surprised me. I had been thinking it might be a hat or some other light souvenir. "Go on, open it," Nikki said with excitement in her voice. Inside the box was a 1-liter beer mug. The stein was hand-painted and stunning. I could hardly believe it. Over the years, I had gathered several beer mugs and steins, but none were as lovely as this one. It even came with papers saying it was one of only 1,000 made, which made it a great collector's item. My collection included 5 beer mugs with names of beers that are no longer made, a pewter mug with a glass bottom that I received as a gift for being in a wedding, and 3 beer steins I had picked up at garage sales. I never realized that Nikki cared so much about my collection. "I can't believe this. This is really nice, but I think you might have spent too much on me," I said. "This must have cost a lot." "You deserve it, and I would never spend too much on you," Nikki replied. She smiled at me and sat on the bed with me. "Thanks, dear. I really like it. I knew you would. I knew I had to get this for you as soon as I saw it, she said. The funny thing was, right after she said that, tears started to flow down her face. I asked her why she was crying, and she replied, "I'm just so happy I could give you this gift. I knew it would mean a lot to you." I pulled Nikki close and held her in my arms for a long time, feeling the warmth between us. Thinking about that night always made my heart feel so full. It was one of those joyful memories. I had a lot of time to think about how fortunate I was to have Nikki in my life. I knew I would feel empty without her. Then it hit me that I was looking back at my life like an old man looking back as he comes close to the end. But I was young, full of life, and had plenty of time to make even more wonderful memories with Nikki. It was time for me to think about what was ahead. By Monday, I was eager to go home. Nikki had gotten the day off, and she arrived at the hospital early to wait for me. At 10 o'clock, a hospital worker brought me out to the main entrance. Then, I got into Nikki's car. As we drove away from the hospital, Nikki said we were going to her parents' house, but I told her I wanted to go home. "The house isn't clean yet," Nikki said. Detective Trenka gave me the name of a company that can help clean up. I called them on Friday and set up a time for them to come today. I want to be there when they clean the mess, and I want to see what was taken so we can file for our insurance, I said. Nikki stayed quiet for the rest of the ride home. I think she was worried about how I would respond to the chaos waiting for us. Before we got to our house, I told Nikki that it might be better for me to enter through the front door instead of dealing with the stairs in the garage. Nikki parked the car in front of the garage and came over to help me out. She held my arm as we took our time walking to the front door. I started to feel anxious about what was inside the house, and I noticed that Nikki seemed uneasy too. Nikki opened the door, and I went in first. As soon as I walked in, a strong smell hit me like metal. Then I saw my small suitcase and carry-on bag at the bottom of the stairs. Both bags were stained with something red. There was also a big puddle of dried blood on the wooden floor next to my things. I recalled that the doctor mentioned I had lost around 2 pints of blood, but it seemed to me like there was much more than that. When Nikki came in, she stood next to me and looked at the dark red puddle. Suddenly, she covered her mouth and rushed to the bathroom. I could hear her getting sick in the toilet. I think the sight of the blood and the smell were too overwhelming for her. I wanted to go to her and help, but I wasn't sure my stomach could handle it. I waited outside the bathroom until Nikki stopped getting sick. After she cleaned her face, I took her by the arm and walked her from the bathroom through the kitchen to the family room. I sat down on the couch with her and tried to make her feel better. As I put my arm around Nikki, I looked around the room. There were books all over the floor and some small items scattered around too. I glanced at my shelf of beer mugs and steins. They were all in place except for one. That special mug was the one Nikki had brought back from Germany for me. I started to worry if it had been taken when Nikki spoke up. "I'm sorry, Eric. I tried to be strong for you, but seeing all that blood brought back all the memories." "I'm okay now," Nikki said. "Do you want some water?" I asked. "No, I'm good," she replied. "Besides, I'm meant to be looking after you. We should get you to bed, and then I'll make you some lunch and bring it up." "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "I don't feel strong enough to climb those stairs right now, and I don't want you to see the mess at the bottom again. I have an idea. Could you make me a sandwich for lunch and put it in the fridge? Then you can go back to work," I suggested. "I can't just leave you here alone," he replied. "Look, I think it would be better for you if you weren't here when they come to clean up the mess in the hallway. I'll just lie on the sofa and rest, and when I'm hungry, I can get the sandwich myself," I explained. "I'm not sure. I just don't feel good about leaving you alone," he said, still unsure. "I'll be okay," I reassured him. "School starts next week, and I know you still have a lot to do to get ready. I will take it easy, and I'll call you if I run into any problems. When you get home tonight, we can start cleaning up this mess," I said. Just then, I noticed the broken stein. It lay in little pieces on the fireplace. Nikki saw where I was looking and started to cry. "It's okay, Nikki," I said gently. "The stein can be replaced. Please make me a sandwich and then leave. Are you really okay with this?" "Yes, I am." "All right, I'll go to work," she said. "You're right. I would feel better if I'm not here until the room is tidy. I can't stand seeing it like this. It makes me feel unwell. It should be cleaned up by the time you get back, I replied. Nikki followed my advice, made the sandwich for me, and then put it in the fridge. After that, she went to work. About an hour later, the cleaners arrived while I was having my sandwich. I got up and opened the door to let them into the entrance. The man in charge looked down at the red puddle on the floor. "Is this all of it, or are there more places to clean?" he asked me. "That should be the only spot, but you might want to check the stairs and the wall on the landing to see if there's any there," I replied. "This should only take an hour to clean and freshen up. Whose blood is this?" "Mine." "Wow, looks like at least 2 pints," he said. "You're lucky to be alive." "How did you know it was 2 pints?" I asked. "I've seen a lot of these situations, and after a while you can just tell," he replied. A crime scene. It was hard to see my home that way. The cleaners started their job, and I returned to the kitchen to finish my sandwich. After I was done eating, I rinsed my plate and went back into the family room. I was just about to sit down when I remembered I should check my safe to see if any thieves had tried to break into it. In our house, there was a cabinet built into the wall above the fireplace. It was meant for a TV. We had a different entertainment center on another wall, so I decided to use the space above the fireplace for my safe. I didn't keep a lot in there, just some insurance papers, legal documents, savings bonds, and a few stock certificates. I had about $100 in cash stored in the safe. The cabinet door was slightly open, so I thought the burglars might have noticed the safe, but when I opened it, the safe looked fine. There were no scratches or marks, so it seemed like no one had tried to break into it or even move it. I opened the safe to see what was inside and found that everything was still there. That made me feel a lot better. I locked the safe and shut the cabinet doors. For a moment, I thought about picking up the broken items lying around the room, but I felt too tired. So I just lay down on the sofa and took a break. When Nikki got home from work, the entryway was clean. The sharp smell was gone, replaced by the warm scent of cinnamon. I found it an odd choice for a freshener, but I liked it. I thought sending Nikki to work that day was a good choice. But when she came home, I wasn't so sure. She looked really stressed and upset. It took 20 minutes and a big drink for her to calm down. When I asked her what was wrong, she started to cry. "I just want this all to be over," she said. "I don't want to think about it anymore." "I'm sure the police will catch these guys soon," I said, but Nikki still looked worried. We didn't get to the cleaning I had planned. Nikki just wanted to cuddle next to me on the sofa all evening. That night was the first time in 2 weeks that Nikki and I slept close together, but we didn't go further. I wasn't feeling well, and Nikki seemed scared to touch me, except for holding my hand and giving me soft kisses on my face. I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up thinking I heard someone in the house. Each time I opened my eyes, I saw that Nikki was awake too. Tuesday was better. I felt a bit stronger and could walk down the stairs on my own. I had breakfast with Nikki, and then I cleaned the kitchen while Nikki got ready for work. Later that morning, Detective Trenka came by to check on me and to ask for a list of things that were missing. While we talked, I started making some coffee. "Did you write down what's missing?" Detective Trenka asked. "No, I didn't, because nothing seems to be gone," I replied. "Really?" Detective Trenka said, his voice sounding a bit teasing. "You might have already considered this, Detective, but I think at least 2 people were involved," I said. Detective Trenka looked amused by my answer. "How about we relax a bit? Call me Tony, and if that works for you, I'll call you Eric." "Sure, that works for me," I replied. "Great, Eric." "Now tell me your idea," Tony said. "Well, we know someone was upstairs because they shot me. The mess downstairs shows that someone was looking for something on the first floor, but nothing was gone. This makes me think that whoever was searching ran away as soon as they heard the gunshots or a little while after. Why didn't they take the TV, the CD player, or the DVD player? What really caught my attention was the safe. Whoever looked around on the first floor must have seen it, so why didn't they try to break it open or take it somewhere else to open it? Isn't a safe exactly what a thief would want?" I asked. "That's a great question. I've been trying to think of that too." "You might be right that the gunshots scared them away," Tony said. "Do you think there could be another reason?" I asked. "I just want to keep my mind open. Sometimes if you try too hard to make the facts fit what you believe, you might end up with the wrong answer," Tony replied, giving me a smile. I waited to see if Tony would share his thoughts with me, but it seemed he didn't want me too involved in his search for answers. By then, the coffee was ready, so I asked Tony if he wanted a cup. "I'd love one," he replied. I filled 2 cups and took them into the family room. We sat down, I on the sofa and Tony in a chair facing me. I saw him looking around the room at the chaos the thieves had caused. "I suppose I'll need to clean this up once you leave," I said. "I've seen worse messes made by thieves, but I've also seen times when everything was left alone except for the things that were taken," Tony replied. At that moment, a question came to my mind that I didn't really want to ask, but I knew I had to. I guess that man who shot me knows that I lived. "Do you think he will come back and try again?" I asked. "There is a chance, but I don't think it's very likely. He knows you are safe, but he also knows you couldn't recognize him. If he comes after you now, he might get caught." "Are you feeling worried?" "Not really about myself, but I am concerned for Nikki's safety. I noticed you didn't sleep well last night. I think it's because you're worried they might come back," I said. "I can send more patrols through your neighborhood for a while if that would help," he replied. "That would be great, thanks." I took a sip of my coffee and changed the topic. "I see you have a new suit today. How are things at home?" I asked. "Much better, thank you." Tony said, "My wife has forgiven me for my mistake. Was it about another woman?" "Sort of," Tony replied. "Tracy saw me getting close with another woman at a party. I had too much to drink and this woman was really flirting with me. I got a bit lost in the moment. Thankfully, Tracy found me just in time. Even though she was very upset about what she saw, I can't imagine how much worse it would be if she had caught me being more intimate with that woman. The only thing that helped me was that Tracy knew I had never done something like that before. I was starting to think that Tony and I were becoming friends. Maybe I was wrong, but I really felt good talking to him and he seemed at ease with me. It's always nice to meet new friends." Tony stayed for another cup of coffee, but then he had to go when he got a call from the police station. I spent the rest of the day cleaning up the mess. There wasn't a lot to tidy up, but I had to go slowly because I still felt weak. The hardest part of cleaning was picking up the broken pieces of the beer stein that Nikki gave me from Germany. Many items had been knocked around the room, but only the stein was broken. It felt like someone had broken it just to be mean. Out of the 13 mugs and steins on the shelf, why did that special stein have to be the one that got damaged? It was the most important thing I owned, and it meant a lot to me. I felt really angry when I thought about it, but then I remembered that I had also been hurt badly before. I tried to see things more clearly. After I finished cleaning the first floor, I went upstairs. I thought it was strange that everything on the second floor seemed normal. Nikki didn't own a lot of fancy jewelry, but what she had was in a box on her dresser. Everything was still there. This made me think I must have arrived at the house right after the man who shot me went upstairs. He didn't have time to start looking for anything valuable. It seemed like my timing, even though it got me hurt, kept the thieves from taking anything from the house. When Nikki came home from work that evening, there was no sign left of what had happened just a week and a half ago. She noticed that I had cleaned the place and frowned at me. "You know you're still supposed to relax," she said. "I couldn't just sit there and stare at the mess anymore," I replied. "Besides, I felt pretty good all day," I said. "Well, you don't look so good right now," she replied. "You look very pale. Just sit there while I make dinner. If you get up again, I'll call Dr. Berger and tell him to send you back to the hospital." Nikki was smiling as she said this. "Okay, I'll behave," I said. "Please don't send me back to the hospital." Nikki started to laugh. "Just sit still while I prepare your dinner," she told me. After dinner, Nikki took me up to bed and changed my bandages. We were both glad that there was no bleeding or fluid coming from my cuts. After Nikki put new bandages on me, she gave me a gentle massage. I must have worn myself out that day because I fell asleep before she finished. On Wednesday morning, I got up and had breakfast with Nikki. "Tonight is the open house for new students at the school," Nikki said. "I can probably skip it if you'd prefer I stay home." "What time will you be back?" I asked. "It starts at 7 and should finish by 8:30. I should be home by 9 at the latest. I'll get back from school around 4, make dinner, and change your bandages before I head to the open house. I need to leave by 6:30, Nikki said. "I think you should go," I replied. "We have to keep living our lives as normally as we can." Nikki was getting ready to go to work, but I could tell that something was troubling her. It was clear to me that she was still concerned about me. When she leaned in to kiss me goodbye, she held me a bit longer and a bit tighter than usual. "I love you," she said softly in my ear. "I love you too." Once Nikki left, the house felt very quiet. I thought about what I could do to keep myself busy, but the only ideas I had were things that would be too hard for me to try in my current state. I had pushed myself too much the day before, and I had promised Nikki and myself that I would take it easy today. So I chose to turn on the CD player and set the volume low. I picked up the Dean Koontz book I had bought recently but hadn't read yet and sat down to enjoy it. I read until Nikki came home, only taking a break to eat lunch. Nikki was happy that I had relaxed all day, but she suggested I should have put the book down for a little while and taken a nap. Nikki changed my bandages, cooked dinner, and by 6:30 she was ready to go to the high school for the open house. When she left, I went into the family room to watch TV. Sadly, the only shows on TV were reruns, so I turned it off and just sat there. With nothing else to think about, my mind went back to the robbery and the shooting. I started to notice something was really bothering me about it all. If this was the group of burglars Tony believed did it, I couldn't figure out why they didn't take anything when they left. I still didn't understand how they got into the house at all. That thought made me feel really uneasy. Feeling this way pushed me to get up and check the safe again. I thought maybe something was gone, something I missed when I looked before. When I opened the safe, I carefully went through all my folders to see if anything was missing. In the end, I noticed something I hadn't seen the first time. I looked at the two $300 gift cards from American Airlines, and my legs felt shaky as I started to understand what they really meant. I placed them back in the safe and then sat down on the sofa to think about everything. After trying to make sense of it all, I finally yelled, "No way! This can't be real! What have you done, Nikki?" The hurt in my chest was more than just from my injuries. I started to think if Nikki had really given me the worst news. I wasn't sure about everything yet, so I knew I had to take my time to avoid making a big mistake. I thought about all the possible situations and kept coming back to one point. Nikki was already in the house when I got shot. She must have been upstairs with the person who shot me when I walked in. Now, I had to think about what that meant and what I should do next. I was really angry and knew that when Nikki came home, things would not go well. I tried to plan what I would say to her, but my anger was so strong that I knew I couldn't hold it back, and that worried me. The idea of Nikki being upstairs with another man was driving me wild. In the end, I realized I couldn't speak to her because I was worried I might hurt her feelings. Once I had all the information in order, I knew it was time to call Tony. But first, I needed to talk to someone else. Jim Culkin and I had grown up in Glendale. We were best friends for as long as I can remember. Jim was my best man at my wedding, and I was his. I hadn't seen Jim much in the last couple of years. Jim still lived in Glendale, and with Nikki and me in Sherman Oaks, it felt too hard to meet up as often as we wanted. That evening, I decided to call Jim. "Hello, Jim," I said. "Eric?" he answered. "Yes, how are you?" I asked. "I'm good, how about you?" he replied. "Not so great right now. I have a problem, and I really need your help," I said. "You know you can always rely on me," Jim answered. "After all, what are friends for?" "I'm thankful for that, but right now I need your help as a lawyer, not just as a friend." "What's going on?" I told Jim everything. I explained the shooting and how it seemed like a break-in, even though nothing was stolen. Then I talked about the airline vouchers and their importance, and I shared what I needed him to do for me. "You can rely on me," Jim said. "What time do you want me to come over?" "How about 9 o'clock?" I replied. "Sounds good. I'll be at your house at 9, Jim said. "Thanks, Jim. This really means a lot to me." "Like I always say, that's what friends are for," Jim answered. As soon as I hung up with Jim, I called Tony on his cell phone. "Tony, it's Eric Anderson." "Eric, I'm happy you called. I have some news for you," he said. "Can you come over tonight at 9? "I need to tell you something important about this case," I replied. "You aren't playing detective, are you?" "No, but I found something that might help us understand the case better. I'm not comfortable with this, but we need to talk," I explained. "You've got me interested now." "I'll be there at 9, Tony said. After I hung up with Tony, I saw that it was 7:45. I had to wait for about an hour and 15 minutes before Jim and Tony showed up. I really wanted Nikki to get home first so she wouldn't walk in and see them there already. During that time, I worked on my plan. I took a legal pad and a pencil and sat at the kitchen table, writing down my ideas. I was still sitting there when Nikki came into the house at 8:50. "What are you writing?" she asked. "I'm just making some notes for something I need to do later," I replied. "What's that about?" "That doesn't matter right now," I said. "We will have some visitors soon." "We will? Who?" "Jim Culkin and Tony Trenka," I said. "We haven't seen Jim in a long time," Nikki said. "Why is he coming here?" "I told him about the shooting, so he's coming to see if he can help," I explained. "It will be nice to see him again, but what can he do?" Nikki asked. "I guess we'll have to wait and find out." "Why is Detective Trenka coming over?" she wanted to know. "He said he has some news about the case," I replied. I noticed worry on Nikki's face. "Have they caught the person who shot you?" "I don't know," I said. "We'll need to wait until he brings her to know for sure." Nikki went upstairs to change her clothes while I sat down and waited for my friends to come over. I really hoped they would get here soon. It was hard to keep my anger hidden. Jim was the first to show up at 9 o'clock sharp. When he walked in, I noticed him checking me out to see how I was doing. We were still standing in the hallway when Nikki came down the stairs and gave Jim a warm hug. "Good to see you again, Jim," Nikki said as she gave him a quick kiss on the cheek. Just then, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and welcomed Tony inside. After I introduced everyone, Tony looked at me as if to ask why Jim was there. "For now, let's just say that Jim is someone who wants to watch," I replied. Tony seemed okay with that, and we all moved to the family room to sit down together. I had made a pot of coffee and asked Nikki if she could help me serve our friends. After everyone was seated with their coffee, I looked at Tony. "Tony, you mentioned on the phone that you had some news for us," I said. "Yes. I want to let you know that the group of robbers we thought might be involved in your shooting has been caught. They were caught stealing from a house about 10 blocks away this afternoon," Tony said. I could see by the look on his face that he had more to add, and it didn't seem great. "Tony, I can tell you think these aren't the ones who shot me." "How did you know that?" Tony asked, surprised. "Like I told you on the phone, I've made some progress in this case on my own," I replied. Nikki grabbed my arm and said, "What? Do you know who shot you?" "No, I don't know who shot me, but I think I can help Tony find out," I replied. I glanced at Jim, who was sitting quietly, watching all of us. Then I looked back at Tony, and he was staring at me. "All right, Eric, it's your turn to talk," Tony said. "I'm really interested to hear what you have to say." "Please be patient with me. I need you to understand how everything happened for it to make sense." "Take your time. I'll wait to ask my questions," Tony replied. "I figured it out tonight. I was looking through my safe and found 2 travel vouchers for $300 each from American Airlines. Ever since I woke up in the hospital, I've been trying to remember what happened from the moment I entered the house and went up the stairs until I was shot. I wanted to remember what the shooter looked like or if something else would come to my mind, but all I could recall was that he held the gun in his left hand and wore a dark ring. When I discovered the travel vouchers, I knew I had to look back even more to start connecting the pieces. I had a clear idea in my mind, but I didn't want to think about it too much. I had planned to get back home from Dallas, arriving at LAX at 5:30 on Friday evening. Nikki was supposed to pick me up from the airport, and we were going to grab dinner on the way home. But things changed. By Thursday, my project was going better than expected. It looked like if we worked hard late on Thursday, we could finish the project and leave a bit earlier on Friday. I talked with my team and the customer, and we all decided to stay late on Thursday to finish the project. That night, we took a break for dinner at 5 o'clock. I called the airline and asked if I could change my flight to an earlier one in the morning. The lady at American Airlines said there was a flight at 7:45 a.m. that would get me to LAX at 8:54 a.m. I asked her to book that flight for me. We finished the work at 11:30 p.m. on Thursday. On Friday morning, I arrived at the airport at 6:15 a.m. I got a cup of coffee, a muffin, and a newspaper. I sat at my gate, waiting for the attendants to open the counter. Once they did, I walked up to get my seat number. I also wanted to do something else I always do when I have time to spare. I asked the gate attendant if the flight was full. She told me it was, so I asked if they needed people to change to a later flight. She said they needed help, so I gave her my ticket and told her I was volunteering. American Airlines gave me a $300 voucher for future travel in return for my ticket. They put me on a flight that was set to leave at 9:15 a.m. That flight was also full, so I ended up getting another $300 voucher and got a spot on the 10:05 a.m. flight. Luckily, that flight wasn't full, and I got to LAX at 11:15 a.m. In just 20 minutes, I grabbed my bags and got a taxi. Traffic was smooth on the highways that morning, so we got from the airport to the house quickly. When I entered the house, I placed my bags in the hall just as the grandfather clock in the living room rang for 1/4 past. I looked at my watch and saw it was 12:15. Before I found those vouchers, I couldn't recall what I did when I first came in, but now I remember. When I set my bags down in the hallway, I walked into the family room. I opened the safe and placed the 2 vouchers inside. I locked the safe and then went back to the entrance. I picked up my bags and went upstairs. We all know what happened next. Nikki, who had been holding my arm tightly since we sat down, squeezed it even more as I talked about what occurred on the stairs. Once I remembered what I did when I came into the house, I understood that there had been no robbers downstairs. There's nowhere for anyone to hide in this room. If someone had been here, I would have noticed them. I would have also seen any mess they left behind. But everything is clean. Now the timeline is tricky. I came into the house at 12:15. On the first floor, everything looked normal. When I went upstairs, at least 2 minutes had gone by, so it was around 12:17 when I got shot. 8 minutes later, at 12:25, Nikki finds me and calls 911. This means that in the time between when I got shot and when Nikki called for help, the burglars chose to mess up things on the first floor to make it look like a break-in. But they didn't take anything. Nothing made sense to me. If the robbers had been in the house but hadn't taken anything yet, and hadn't even started looking around the first floor when one of them shot me, then why would they mess up the family room to make it seem like a robbery? Why wouldn't they just leave and make it look like a simple murder? Why draw attention to themselves? That's a good point, Tony said. I can tell you're starting to think like I am. Who do you think shot you and why? I'm not sure who shot me or why it happened, I said. But I have a feeling that someone might know. I think there were 2 people in the building that day. One of them was the shooter. The other one stayed with me and watched as I bled for 8 minutes before calling for help. While this was happening, the person who fired the gun messed up the family room to make it seem like a break-in. Nikki had moved away from me and was now huddled in the corner of the sofa, crying. I think Nikki knows who shot me and why, I said. Tony didn't seem shocked. I'm sorry, Eric. I started to think that's what happened too, he replied. I need to bring her in for questioning. Tony, can we talk for a few minutes? I asked. I'm not sure that's a good idea right now. I think you should wait before talking to Nikki until we sort this out. It's not for me. I want Nikki to talk to Jim, I said. He is her lawyer. You brought your wife's lawyer here even though she might be connected to your shooting? Tony asked. I'm not sure what was happening between Nikki and the person who shot me, but I can't believe she would have meant for this to happen, I said. I just want to make sure she has a good lawyer she trusts. Just give Jim a few minutes to talk to Nikki. I think she will help you and answer your questions, Tony said. Nikki was still snuggled up on the sofa and hadn't spoken at all. I'll support you on this, Tony continued. She can have a chat with Jim. After that, I'll offer her a chance to come to the station and talk. If she decides not to come, we will need to get a warrant for her arrest. I can't do more than that. Jim, Tony, and I all got up and walked to the door. I shook Tony's hand and thanked him for letting Nikki come in on her own. Then Jim shook Tony's hand, too. I'll bring her to the station in about an hour, Jim said. I know her pretty well, and I think she'll want to help. I hope you're right, Tony replied before leaving the house. When the door shut, Jim turned to me and said, I'll go speak with her now. You know that whatever Nikki shares with me will be kept secret, and I can't talk about it with you. I get it, I replied. I wanted you to do this because Nikki would feel better with you helping her instead of someone she doesn't know. I would never ask you to break a promise to a client, and I trust you wouldn't do that either, even if I did. I thought you would see it that way, Jim, I replied. But things aren't normal right now. Is there anything you want me to say to Nikki? If the police let her go after they talk to her, she'll need to go to her parents' house, I said. I still care for her, but I can't be with her at this time. Tell her that I will call her dad and let him know what is happening. I know he will come to the police station to support her. You seem like you want to add something, Jim said. What's on your mind? It's just that I'm not sure how everything will turn out. But things do not look good for my marriage, I said. I want you to help Nikki as much as you can, but I kindly ask that you don't represent her in the divorce. I understand you can't help me with this. It would not be fair, and I really don't want my best friend next to my wife during the divorce. If she asks you, just tell her to find another lawyer. Sure thing, he replied. I don't want to be involved in your divorce with Nikki either. I'll go talk to her now. I think it's best if you don't speak with Nikki again until everything is settled. If you need to share something with her, just call me. Do we have a deal? I told Jim that I was on board, but I would also talk to Nikki through her parents if I needed to. I went to our bedroom while Jim headed to the family room to chat with Nikki. About 20 minutes later, Jim called for me from the bottom of the stairs, so I went down to see what he needed. Eric, Nikki wants to go upstairs and gather some clothes to take with her. I'll go to my study and then she can go upstairs to pack, I said. I wanted to ask if Nikki decided to help with the police investigation, but I knew I couldn't. Jim would share what he could, but for everything else, I would just have to wait and see what turned out. While Nikki was upstairs packing her bags, I sat at my desk trying to understand all that had happened that day. There had never been any signs of trouble in our marriage, or had I just overlooked them? The thought of Nikki being in our room with another man didn't feel right to me, but that was what the clues seemed to show. Tony had the same thoughts as me, even before I realized it. Was Nikki really seeing someone else? Did her other partner shoot me? Tony said the person who shot me really wanted me dead, but they wanted me to suffer first. Why would anyone want that? I keep thinking that maybe once I learn who shot me, everything will make more sense. What's hardest for me to understand is why Nikki didn't call for help right away. 8 long minutes went by before she called 911. Was she hoping I wouldn't make it? Did she really dislike me that much? I didn't want to believe it. Nikki had always been a caring wife. Since the incident, she had done all she could to show me her love. I thought maybe guilt played a part in her actions, but could there be something more troubling behind it? Was she really trying to make me believe she had nothing to do with my being shot? What scared me the most was thinking that I might never find out the full story of what happened. When I heard footsteps coming toward my study door, I hurriedly wiped the tears from my eyes and turned as the door opened. Jim peeked inside. Eric, we're leaving now. You said you would call Nikki's dad, right? I'll call him in a few minutes. Thanks, Jim. I sat at my desk and waited until I heard the front door close. I felt like I might cry, but I knew I had to stay strong for a little while longer. I still needed to call Nikki's dad, and I wanted to make sure I reached him before he went to sleep. No one wants to hear bad news like I had to share, and if he was already in bed when I called, it would just make it harder. George? Oh, Eric. How are you, my boy? Nikki's father asked. I'm getting better, I replied. I have some bad news to share. There was a pause on the phone, then he asked, What is it, Eric? Nikki is at the police station in Sherman Oaks. They are asking her questions about my shooting, I explained. Oh my God, are you serious? He replied. You can't think that Nikki had anything to do with this. George, I know this is hard to believe. It was a shock to me too, I said. I can't share more details right now. I just wanted to ask you to go to the police station and be there for her. She will need to stay with you and Mary for a little while. Eric, I don't know what to say. This can't be right. Nikki loves you. I can't believe this is happening. I'm really sorry, George. I know this is tough to understand, I said. Will you go to the station? Of course. What are you going to do, Eric? He asked. I'm not sure yet. Please don't do anything you might regret. Let's wait to see what really happened before you decide anything for the future, he said. I will, George. Thank you. I hung up the phone and rested my head on the desk, trying to clear my mind. This was going to be the toughest moment since everything began. I hadn't taken the time to really think about what this all meant before. From the moment I found the travel vouchers in the safe, my mind had been busy with all the tasks I needed to take care of. I needed to call Jim and tell him everything. I also had to reach out to Tony and ask him to come to my house. I thought a lot about how to explain everything to Tony so he would get it. After that, I had to speak to Nikki's dad. Now that all that was done, I was alone, thinking about what had happened to me and trying to decide what to do next. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Nicky had someone special, and he had hurt me. He wanted me out of the way so he could have Nicky all to himself. Was he really going to hurt me, or did he act because I came in at the wrong time? How long had they been seeing each other? I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep with these thoughts racing in my mind, so I took one of the pain pills the doctor gave me and went to bed. The strong pill helped me fall asleep in just a few minutes. When I woke up on Thursday, I felt confused and alone. How was I going to get through the day without Nikki? I was really mad at her, but I also missed her a lot. I tried to plan what to do next, but my thoughts kept returning to how she had hurt me. I knew I had to move forward, but I knew it would be tough. The phone rang a few times that morning, but I let the answering machine take the calls. Some were from the school, asking about Nikki's absence. Nikki's mom called and wanted to speak with me, but I wasn't prepared for that talk. A few other people called and didn't leave a message. I thought maybe one of those calls was from Nikki's partner. At 5 o'clock, Tony called me. As soon as I heard his voice, I answered the phone. "Tony, it's me." "Hey, Eric. How are you doing?" he asked. "Not so great." "Do you have any scotch at your place?" Tony asked. "Yeah, I have a bottle." "Why?" I asked. "I want to come by for a drink," he replied. "Okay, come on over. I could use some company," I said. An hour later, Tony was sitting in the big chair across from me, swirling the ice in his glass of scotch. "Sorry, I can't share any more right now," Tony said. He had just finished telling me that Nikki had worked with them and answered all their questions. He said she was at the station for 2 hours, and then they let her go home with her dad. Tony told me they now knew who shot me, but he couldn't say who it was until that person was in jail. The shooter was out of state for a meeting and was expected to return on Sunday. They didn't want to give him any hints that they were searching for him. Tony mentioned that they could have the police in Colorado arrest him right away, but that would mean a long process to bring him back. This could make everything take longer than necessary. Tony mentioned that the assistant district attorney in charge of the case chose to wait until Sunday to catch the suspect at his house. I wanted the Denver police to take him in. I think it's better to have him in jail, waiting to be sent back, than to risk him discovering that we are searching for him. He might run away if he finds out we're looking for him, Tony said, but I didn't have a choice. I felt a bit better knowing they had figured out who shot me, but then I realized that they got that information from Nikki, and it confirmed what I was afraid was true. Nikki was involved. Tony told me he didn't know what Nikki had said to the investigator. He wasn't there when they talked to her. Even if he had been, he said he still couldn't share that information with me. He told me that this was still an active investigation, and he couldn't share any more information than what he already had. I sipped my drink and stared at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly. I'm not sure how to feel about all of this. "I think I'm just really confused," I said. "That makes sense. Things will be clearer next week," Tony replied. "If I were in your shoes, I would get as far away as possible," he added. "What? Leave town? But where will I go?" I asked. "You could go to the beach, visit Vegas, or even go to Hawaii. Just get away for a bit. A new place might help you," he replied. I thought about it for a moment and said, "You might be right. There's nothing holding me here right now. Maybe relaxing on a beach is just what I need." "I'll call you if anything important comes up," Tony said. "I think I will. I don't know where I will go yet, but I know I need to go somewhere." "Thanks for the idea. You will call me if anything changes, won't you?" "I said I would, didn't I?" Tony answered. Tony stayed for another hour and we just talked. When he first came over, I thought he wanted information from me, but it was clear he just wanted to chat. Before he left, he got my cell phone number and asked me to tell him where I would be going and where I would stay. After Tony left, I thought about where I might go to take a break for a bit. Hawaii seemed like a wonderful place, but I didn't think I could handle a long flight in my current state. Every location I thought of was either too far away to reach easily or too close to do the trick. When I finally went to bed that night, I still hadn't decided where to go. On Friday morning, I called my office to check in and see how things were going without me. I felt a mix of relief and disappointment when I learned they were managing just fine on their own. I was talking to my boss, Charlie Carson, about when I could return to work. He told me not to stress about it. Your job will be here when you are ready, Charlie said. How is Nikki managing with everything? She's doing as well as she can in this situation, I replied. I hadn't mentioned that she was caught up in the shooting. At that moment, I thought it was best if not many people knew about it. I understand how hard it must be for you to just sit and do nothing, Charlie said. What will you do to keep busy? I'm thinking of leaving town for a few weeks, I replied. Where will you go? He asked. I'm not sure yet. I can't travel too far. I can't sit still for more than a few hours, so I can't do long car or plane rides, I said. What about Vegas? Charlie asked. I'm not sure, I replied. I thought about it, but I don't want to stay in one of those big hotels. I need some time alone. It would be nice if I could have both my own space and still enjoy the casinos and nice restaurants. I think I might have the answer for you, Charlie said. I have a little house in Las Vegas, just a few miles from the Strip. I bought it a few years back before house prices went up a lot. You're welcome to stay there. That's really nice of you, but I'm not sure, Charlie interrupted me. Honestly, you would be helping me out. We haven't been there in almost 3 months. I would be grateful if you could spend some time there and look after things for me. Check that there are no water leaks and that the air conditioner is running well. Well, if you put it like that, I can do it. It's just a quick flight and a taxi ride. I'll take care of it, I replied. Thank you. Great. I just have a few things for you to do while you're there, he said. Of course, tell me what you need. There's an old Honda Civic in the garage. You might need to charge the battery I have in the garage. Please use that while you're there. Also, fill the gas tank before you leave. And before you come home, could you pick up a case of Heineken and put it in the fridge? We're going there next month, and it would be nice to have some cold beer ready for us. I can do that. I might even get some for myself. Thanks, Charlie, I said. I'm happy this works out for you, Charlie replied. I'll leave the key at your house when I get off work tonight. I decided to book a flight to Vegas for the next morning, so I called to make my reservations. Later, I called Nikki's parents' house. Hello? Hi, Mary, it's Eric. Eric, do you want to speak to Nikki? Mary asked. No, I can't talk to her at the moment, I replied. Please, she really needs to talk to you. I'm sorry, I just can't deal with that right now. I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to be away for a bit, I said. I will leave in the morning, so please tell Nikki she can come to the house any time after 10 tomorrow to pick up her clothes or anything else she needs. I'll let her know, Eric, but can't you talk to her yourself? Mary asked. Mary, I just can't. I'm feeling too upset and hurt to handle that right now. I'm really sorry, I replied. I understand. I really hope you both can figure things out, Mary said. I don't know why, but what Mary just said upset me. Figure things out? Come on, Mary, her partner shot me. That doesn't make it easy to forgive. Before Nikki's mom could respond, I hung up. After that call, I felt really down. I felt sorry for how I treated Mary. I really wanted us to find a way to fix things, but I just didn't know how we could do that. I spent the rest of the day thinking about my relationship with Nikki. I tried to remember any little thing that might have shown there was a problem in our marriage, but I couldn't find anything. I couldn't remember anything that Nikki had done that made me think she was being unfaithful or that there was an issue in our marriage. Instead, I could only recall the many ways she had shown her love for me. I always felt sure that Nikki loved me just as much as I loved her. I couldn't understand how all of this had happened. I thought my time in Las Vegas might help me figure things out. At 6:30 that evening, Charlie came to my house. He handed me the keys and gave me directions to his place in Vegas. I think you and Nikki will really enjoy the house, Charlie said. Nikki isn't going with me, I replied, and as soon as I said it, I regretted it. She's not? Why not? Charlie asked. She couldn't make it, was the first excuse that came to my mind. Classes begin on Monday, so I need to stay in town. Charlie, please do me one more favor. Don't tell anyone where I am. No one. I really don't want to be bothered. I could see that Charlie got me. Don't worry, no one will find out where you are unless you say something, Charlie replied. After Charlie went, I called Tony and let him know I was heading to Vegas. Which hotel are you in? He asked. I'm not staying at a hotel. I'm at a friend's house, I answered. That's good. Who else knows where you are? He asked. Just my boss, but that's only because it's his house. Why do you ask? I don't want anyone to know where you are until we catch the person we are looking for. I'm not thrilled with the assistant DA's choice to hold off on the arrest until the guy gets back. Too many things could go wrong. I think it's safer if fewer people know where you are. Then I'm happy I told my boss not to share my plans, I replied. Well done, Tony said. Have you reached out to your wife? No. I spoke to her mother this morning to say I'd be away for a bit. She wanted me to speak with Nikki, but I said no. That's smart. I know this is hard, but it's best to wait to talk to her until we sort everything out, Tony said. Okay, I have your phone number so I can reach you when I need to. Just keep your phone nearby. Wow, you're acting a bit overprotective, aren't you? Don't forget what I said. This guy didn't just shoot you without thinking. He wanted to hurt you, and he wanted it to be slow and painful. I believe that if he saw you again, he would try to finish what he started, Tony said. I could be wrong, but my 15 years as a police officer tell me I'm right. There's no point in taking risks. I hear you, and I'll be cautious, I replied. Is there anything else you want to share with me? Yes. The assistant DA wants to speak to your wife again tomorrow. Can you think of anything we should ask her that might help us with this case? He questioned. Tony, I've been thinking about that all day, but I can't come up with anything. Nikki has never done anything to make me doubt her. I can't think of anything that could help your search. I wish I could do more. I want to find the answers just like you do, I said. I believe you, he replied. When are you heading out? I have a flight at 9 a.m. from Burbank. Well, enjoy your time here, I guess. Just try to relax and take care of yourself. Some of the hardest moments in this case are still to come, and you will need to stay strong to handle them, Tony said. Tony, I really thank you for all you've done. It's only been 2 weeks since this chaos began, and the one good thing that has come from it is that I feel like I have made a new friend, I replied. You're right. You have gained a friend. I don't usually get this close to a case. I just hope that when this is all finished, you will still see me as a friend, Tony said. I don't think that will be a problem. I really value friendship. Plus, having a police officer as a friend seems like a smart choice for me, I answered. You know, you're not as silly as you seem, Tony remarked. I hear that all the time. After the call, I went upstairs to pack for my trip. I needed to bring enough clothes for 2 weeks, but I also had to keep my bags light. I still couldn't lift heavy suitcases, so I brought a small rolling bag and a carry-on bag. I mostly packed socks and underwear. I took 3 pairs of pants, 3 pairs of shorts, and 6 short-sleeve shirts. I knew Charlie had a washer and dryer, so I didn't need to bring too many clothes. If I needed anything else, I could buy it in Vegas. At 10:30 on Saturday morning, I was in Las Vegas, riding in a taxi heading west on Charleston Boulevard. That morning, it was already 101 degrees and getting hotter. When I walked out of the airport building, it felt like stepping into a hot oven. Thankfully, the taxi had a strong air conditioner. Charlie Carson lived on Desert Foothills Drive, around 7 miles west of Las Vegas Boulevard. When the taxi stopped in front of his house, I was very surprised. Charlie had told me it was a small house. I suppose 3,500 square feet is small if you think about it that way. The house was white with a red roof, similar to many others around it, but this one felt fancier. The front had big double doors made of red oak with colorful glass windows. When I walked in, I entered a big entrance hall with a stone floor. The air conditioning was running, so the house felt nice and cool at 72 degrees. As I looked around, I found out that it was a smart home. A computer managed everything in the house. Charlie could change the temperature, set the alarms, and turn on the security lights from anywhere using the internet. There were cameras above the front door, above the garage, and in the back of the house. These cameras watched over the back door and the swimming pool. Everything was very modern. Inside, the house looked amazing, like something you would see in a fancy magazine. The main bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and it was very big. The room was the entire length of the house, with windows facing both east and west. From the west windows, you could see the lovely mountains. The east windows showed the hotels along the main street and the pool in the backyard. Since the back of the house faced east, the afternoon sun stayed away from the patio and the big pool. Being in the house made me feel a bit happier for a while. As I looked around the lovely house, I thought, Nikki would really like this. But then the sadness I had been feeling for the last 3 days hit me hard again. Why did I miss her so much while also feeling so angry at her? I was at Charlie's house alone because of what Nikki had done. I tried to push my thoughts about Nikki aside and think about what I would do for the rest of the day. The swimming pool looked very nice, but I thought I should do a few other things first while I still had some energy. I knew that as the day went on, I would feel more tired. That's how it had been since I woke up in the hospital almost 2 weeks ago. Each day, I felt stronger in the morning but grew weaker as the day continued. My first task was to start the Honda in the garage so I could go buy some groceries. The car was 10 years old, but Charlie had clearly taken great care of it. I felt happy when the battery worked and the car started right away. As I drove out of the garage, I was glad I had noticed the shopping center while riding in the taxi. It was just 5 blocks away and I found it without any trouble. I bought enough food, soft drinks, and some beer to last me a week. Then I drove back home. As I drove the car into the garage, I felt very tired. I could hardly lift the bags of groceries to take them inside the house. I finally got the groceries put away. Then I poured myself a big glass of orange juice, thinking it might give me back some of my energy. I made a sandwich, and after eating, I thought it would be nice to go outside and relax by the pool. I wanted to enjoy the sun before it went down behind the house. I put on my swim shorts and went to the bathroom. I took off my bandages and put on some sunscreen. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the 3 dark scars from where I had been hurt. I thought to myself, what great talking points they are. I felt a bit uneasy about my scars, so I slipped on a shirt before heading outside. I waited until I was sure the neighbors couldn't see me before I took the shirt off. The heat was so strong that I decided to jump into the pool to cool down. Feeling better, I got out and lay back on a lounge chair. I was almost dozing off when my phone rang. Eric? Hey, Tony, how's it going? Good. Hey, Eric, can I ask you a few questions? Sure, ask anything you like, I replied, even though I couldn't think of what else he could want to know. Can you tell me about Sarah Bowden? Tony asked. Sarah Bowden? What does she have to do with this? I wondered. I'm not sure. I hope you can share something with me, Tony said. Sarah was a girl I met in college. Did you go out with her? Yes, I went out with her 3 or 4 times. Did you spend the night with her? Tony asked. I was starting to feel irritated. What's this about? Sorry, Eric, it's just part of the investigation. Did you and her become close in that way? No. Is that why you ended things with her, because she didn't want to be that close? Tony asked. No, it wasn't like that at all, I replied, my voice getting a bit sharp. We went out a few times and then we both saw that it wasn't going anywhere, so we decided to stop dating. Were you still able to talk after you decided to stop seeing each other? Yes, we could still talk, but we didn't really end things. We were never just with each other. What we had didn't last very long. Why do you want to know about a girl I went out with a few times more than 10 years ago? It's something that came up during my investigation. Were you with your wife back then, too? No. I hadn't met Nikki yet. All right. Can you tell me about your relationship with Sarah Bowden? What do you want to know? I replied. Why don't you start with how you met? I took a deep breath and tried to think back. It was a Saturday night, and I was going back to the fraternity house after a party. I stopped to get gas at a small store by the gas station. While I was filling my tank, a car pulled up to the other side of the pumps. A couple was sitting in their car, and the man was shouting at the woman. I couldn't hear their words, but he was raising his voice a lot. When my gas tank was full, I went into the store to pay. As I came out, I noticed the man from the other car walking into the store, I said. Did you know him? Tony asked. No, we didn't even glance at each other as we walked by. When I returned to my car, the girl from the other car jumped out and asked me to take her with me. I noticed she had a bruise under her eye, and I guessed her boyfriend must have hurt her. I quickly told her to get in my car, and we drove off before her boyfriend came out of the store. She seemed really upset. I asked her where she wanted to go, and she said she would like to get a cup of coffee. The only place that was open at that time of night was a Denny's. We found a small table and ordered 2 cups of coffee. Then we sat quietly for a bit. After a while, I asked her why a guy had hurt her. She said he wasn't really her boyfriend. She explained that she had gone out with him 2 times, but he quickly became very controlling. She told me that earlier that night, she was at a dance with a friend. While they were having fun, a guy walked in and took her by the arm, pulling her out of the place. She said he forced her to get into his car and then started blaming her for being unfaithful. When I saw them at the gas station, she was trying to explain to him that they weren't in a serious relationship. She could dance with or spend time with anyone she wanted. That was when he hurt her. When he went into the store to buy cigarettes, she suddenly got out of the car and asked me for help. We chatted for quite a while that night, and then I drove her back to her dorm. When I dropped her off, she thanked me for my help and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. I wasn't sure what to do next, so I asked her if she wanted to go out again. By the end of our first date, I felt like we didn't really connect. I thought about ending things then, but I felt she wanted me to ask her out again, so I did. It was on our third or fourth date that we both saw things were not moving forward. We decided to go our separate ways as friends. "Did you stay friends?" Tony asked. "I think we could have, but I just didn't see her much after that. I ran into her on campus a few times in the next month, but then I never saw her again." "Who was the guy that hurt her?" Tony asked. "I don't know. I can't remember if she ever told me his name." "Is there anything else you can share about Sarah Bowden?" Tony asked. "No. This is the first time anyone has brought up her name since college. Well, hold on. Nikki asked me about her once, about a year ago." "Why did she ask?" "I'm not sure," I replied. "It was right after she got back from Germany. I had prepared a special dinner to celebrate her return, and while we were eating, Nikki asked if I knew a Sarah Bowden." "What did you say?" Tony wanted to know. I told her the truth. "I had gone out with her a few times during my junior year," I said. "And Nikki didn't tell you why she asked?" Tony asked. "Nikki said someone told her to ask me if I knew her, but she wouldn't say who it was," I replied. "Why was your wife in Germany?" "She went as a helper for a trip with the German club at Nikki's school," I explained. "Who else went on the trip with her?" "The German teacher, Carol Stanley, and her husband, Jack. Then there was Barbara Martin, who teaches history, and her husband, Cal, plus the school counselor, Janice Whiten, and the gym teacher, John Parker," I said. Tony's face changed for a second, as if something I said clicked with him. "Why didn't you go with your wife?" "I was supposed to go, but I had to back out because I needed to attend a work conference in Denver that was on the same week," I said. "Has your wife ever talked about Sarah Bowden again?" "No." "So that's all there is to it?" "Yes." "I hope that's true," Tony said. "What does that mean?" I asked. "I'm not sure if this Sarah Bowden is connected to this case, but I need to check it out. I just hope you told me everything about your past with her," Tony replied. I was feeling frustrated. Was Tony suggesting that I did something wrong with Sarah? I used to think he was my friend, but now he was acting weird. "Can you tell me why you're asking about Sarah?" I asked. "Sorry, I can't share anything right now," he replied. "Why are you looking for trouble? I thought we were friends." "That's the issue with having a friend in the police. I still have to do my job," Tony said before ending the call. Doing his job? That didn't feel right. Someone was trying to confuse the investigation by involving Sarah. I couldn't understand how she could be part of this problem. I spent the rest of the weekend unwinding. I lounged by the pool and read a lot of books from Charlie's collection. I was really surprised by my boss. Who knew he had such a big library at home? I never thought he read it all. On Monday, I began to work out more. I went for a 2-mile walk in the morning, and later that day I started swimming laps. I thought I would get a call from Tony on Monday to tell me they had caught the person who shot me, but he never called. In the afternoon, I called Nikki's dad to check on her. After I said hi, I asked how Nikki was doing. "Eric, did you know that Nikki quit her job?" George asked. "She quit? Why?" "Why?" I asked. "She said it was because she was worried that people would start talking after this news comes out," George replied. "But I think there is more to it." I wasn't sure what to make of that. Nikki really enjoyed teaching, so I felt bad for her, but I also thought she brought this on herself. "Please tell her I'm sorry she had to leave her job." "I will, Eric," he replied. I didn't have anything else to say, so I ended the call. By late Tuesday afternoon, I still hadn't heard from Tony. I wanted to call him, but part of me didn't want to talk to him. I was still a bit annoyed about how he asked me about Sarah Bowden. On Wednesday morning, Charlie called me. "How's the house treating you, Eric?" he asked. "It's good, Charlie." "I thought you said it was a small place." I replied. It is small compared to my house in Sherman Oaks, he said. So, did you get the car running? Yes, I did, and I grabbed a few packs of Heineken. But I don't think they will last until you arrive. I might have to buy more before I go home. What's happening over there? Not much, but a police detective stopped by this morning asking about you, Charlie replied. I was getting frustrated. Why was Tony looking into my work? What did he ask? I inquired. He wanted to know if I knew where you were. He already knows where I am. Oh, wait, no, he doesn't. I told him I was staying at a friend's house, but I didn't say whose house or give him the address. Did you let him know where I am? Yes, I hope that was okay. It's fine. It's okay to tell the police where I am, I said. Charlie and I chatted a bit more about work and the projects he wanted me to help with again soon. After our call, I felt pretty good, so I poured myself a Heineken and relaxed in the pool, feeling refreshed inside and out. When I didn't hear from Tony by 5 o'clock that evening, I decided to take a drive down to the Strip. I planned to play some blackjack and then have dinner. I thought about going to the Bellagio, but then I remembered how much Nikki liked it there. I didn't want to think about her that night, so I chose to go to Treasure Island instead. I played blackjack for 3 hours, and then I started to feel very tired. I chose not to have dinner at one of the nice restaurants on the Strip. Instead, I went back home. I arrived at the house just before 9 o'clock. It was only when I went into the kitchen to make a sandwich that I saw I had missed a call on my cell phone. I must have not heard it ring while I was at the casino. I listened to my voicemail, and there was a message from Tony. It just said, "Call me," and gave me his phone number. I was still upset with him, so I decided to wait until I finished my sandwich before calling. "You wanted me to call?" I said when he picked up the phone. "Where have you been?" Tony asked. "Whoa, what's going on? I don't have to report to you. I went out tonight," I replied. "Sorry if I seem rude, but we have an issue. We can't find him," Tony explained. "Who can't you find?" I asked. "Our suspect." "He didn't come back from his meeting in Denver," Tony said. "We know he left his hotel, went to the airport, and got on the plane to L.A., but after that, we lost track of him at LAX. So the guy who shot me is still out there? What the hell? How did this happen?" I asked. "I'm sorry, my friend, but this isn't my fault. Remember, I wanted him caught in Denver and held there, but someone else made the decision. Now he's free. We don't know if he's aware that we are searching for him or not. We really hope not. You should be okay over there, and we are watching your wife closely. We don't think she reached out to him, but we are doing all we can to make sure that doesn't happen." "Do you think Nikki might have told him that you were searching for him?" "I didn't think so before, but now, it's possible. Who really knows?" "So, besides that, how are you doing?" Tony asked. "I'd be doing a lot better if you would stop getting involved in my life and catch that guy," I replied. "What do you mean, getting involved in your life?" Tony asked. "First, you called me asking about a girl I knew over 10 years ago and wouldn't say why. Then this morning, you were asking around at my workplace about me." "What are you talking about?" Tony questioned. "My boss called me this morning and said you were there first thing, asking questions about me." "Oh, no. It wasn't me, Eric. What are you asking about?" "It wasn't you? Did you send someone else?" "No. Charlie told me that the police officer who came asked him where I was, and he told him. Oh, no. You need to leave the house right now. Get a hotel room somewhere and don't talk to anyone but me," Tony said. "Do you think he is coming here?" "I'm not sure, but I think it's likely." "Why else would he want to know where you are?" "Tony?" "What?" "I think it's time you tell me who this guy is," I said. "John Parker." "The high school gym teacher?" "That's right. How well do you know him?" Tony asked. "I don't really know him at all," I replied. "Nikki used to talk about him a lot when he first started at the school 2 years ago. She thought he would be a great gym teacher and football coach. I have never met him myself." "Oh, no. I just remembered that Nikki once told me that Parker mentioned he knew who I was from college." "But you don't know him?" "I can't recall his name from school, and I don't know if I would recognize him if I saw him," I replied. Then another idea hit me. "Is Nikki involved with John Parker?" My chest began to feel tight as I thought about it. How long had this been happening? How did I not notice any signs that Nikki was being unfaithful to me? I felt hurt, betrayed, angry, and foolish all at once. We still don't know what Mr. Parker's connection is to your wife. We only have her story for now, but we can't say if it's the truth yet. We will get to the bottom of it, Tony said. What did Nikki tell you? I'm sorry, Eric, but I can't share that right now. I promise to tell you everything as soon as I can. Right now, I just want you to leave that house and find somewhere else to stay for tonight. He might already be on his way. It only takes about an hour to fly from LA to Vegas, I replied. He could be in Vegas, but he didn't fly. We've been watching the airports and checking with his credit card company. He hasn't used his card today at all. If he's in Vegas, he likely drove there. I need you to leave the house now and make sure no one is following you. If you think someone is following you, call me right away, Tony said. What can you do about it if I'm being followed? You're in LA and I'm in Vegas, I replied. I can contact the police in Las Vegas and ask them to help you. All right, I'm leaving now. I hung up the phone and began to turn off the lights. After the house was dark, I peeked out the windows to see if any cars were parked on the street. When I noticed there were no cars outside, I went into the garage and got into Charlie's Honda. During all of this, I had felt many different emotions. But now, as I sat in the dark thinking about what to do next, I felt scared for the first time. I turned on the Honda and waited a few seconds before I pressed the button on the remote to open the garage door. As soon as there was enough space under the door, I quickly drove out of the garage. I pressed the button to close the door as I turned left onto the street. I was 2 blocks from home and there were no other cars around. No one was behind me, so I started to wonder if it was really John Parker who had seen Charlie that morning. Maybe it was a police officer and Tony just didn't realize it. I was stopped at the red light to turn left onto Charleston Boulevard when I noticed a silver Ford Explorer turning right from Charleston onto Desert Foothills Drive. I glanced at the SUV, and even though I couldn't see the driver because of the dark windows, I noticed it had California license plates. Seeing a car with California license plates in Nevada isn't unusual, but when I spotted one turning onto the street where I was staying, it felt like too much of a coincidence. While I was driving east on Charleston, I thought about which hotel to go to. Then I reached the I-15 interchange. In that moment, I made up my mind. I turned right onto the ramp for I-15 South. John Parker might be in Las Vegas looking for me, but I was heading back to LA. My old Honda, which I had for 10 years, drove well. It stayed at 75 to 80 miles per hour all the way back to the 10 freeway. Things moved a bit slower there, but I reached Burbank at 2:30 a.m. and checked into a small hotel close to the Burbank airport. I wasn't sure if it was safe to go home. I still didn't know if John Parker was really in Vegas looking for me. He could be watching my house. Maybe he was heading to Mexico. I really had no idea what was happening. I sat down on the bed in my small, messy hotel room and started to ask myself questions again, trying to figure things out. Why would John Parker want to hurt me? Did he want me gone so he could be with Nikki? That could be true, but it didn't seem right. If he wanted Nikki and she wanted him, they didn't need to hurt me at all. Divorce would have been a lot simpler. I didn't have a lot of money that Nikki would get. She would have been fine if we split up. So there had to be another reason. I started to think I should have talked to Nikki about what I knew before asking Tony and Jim for help. Maybe she would have explained everything to me. My body hurt, my head was starting to throb, and I really needed some rest. The next morning, I called Tony and let him know where I was. I told him about the car I saw with California license plates last night. What kind of car was it? Tony asked. It was a silver Ford Explorer, I replied. That was probably his Explorer, Tony said. We found out late last night that Mr. Parker had left his Ford Explorer at the airport when he flew to Denver. We even got a picture from a security camera of him driving out of the parking lot on Sunday evening. Where are you now? I'm at the hotel. Room 254, I said. 45 minutes later, Tony arrived at my door. He came inside with a briefcase, which he placed on the only table in the tiny room. Tony opened the briefcase and pulled out a photograph, then gave it to me. Do you know this guy? He asked. The photo was in black and white. It was taken from above, looking down through the car's windshield. The man in the driver's seat had dark hair and a plain face. He looked quite big in the picture, but it was hard to tell for sure. I didn't know him. I turned to Tony and asked, "Is this John Parker?" "That's him. Have you ever seen him?" he replied. "No. He doesn't look familiar at all to me, I answered. I told the Las Vegas police and the Nevada State Police to watch for his car. If they find him, they will stop him and keep him until we can get there, Tony said. I think you'll want to see this. Tony took a videotape from his briefcase and put it on the table. I'm not allowed to show this to anyone yet, but I thought you should see it. You can't tell anyone I gave it to you. I promise I won't, but what is it? You'll have to wait and see, Tony replied. I need to get back to work. Things are a bit hectic since Mr. Parker was gone. Tony stood at the door, ready to leave. He said, I'll call you later so we can talk. After Tony closed the door, I turned my attention to the television on the dresser. I knew there wasn't a VCR, but I checked anyway. I picked up the phone and called the front desk. I asked if they had a VCR I could borrow. The man who answered said they did have VCRs, and if I wanted one, he would send it up to my room. I was really surprised when the VCR arrived just 5 minutes later. I didn't think they would provide that kind of service at this hotel. It only took me a little while to set up the VCR. I put the tape into the player but paused for a moment before pressing play. I was a bit worried about what I might see. Just as I was about to press the button, a memory from my time in the hospital came back to me. I remembered waking up and hearing Nikki talking to a man by the door. She called him John. Could it be Parker? I thought for a moment and tried to recall their conversation. Nikki said, John, you really shouldn't be here. Does he remember what happened? The man asked. Nikki replied, I don't know. Detective Trenka tried to ask him questions about it yesterday, but Eric was too out of it from the pain medicine to reply. As soon as he can talk to the police, I want to hear what he says, she said. John, please go before he wakes up and sees you. Also, Detective Trenka might come back any minute. John replied, All right, I'm leaving, but don't forget what I told you. I won't forget. Now please go. I just can't handle this right now, Nikki said. She had him in my hospital room, I said loudly. I needed to remember to tell Tony about that. I took a deep breath and pressed the play button. The TV screen showed only static for a few seconds. Then the picture changed a few times before it finally became clear. On the screen, I could see Nikki and Jim sitting at a table facing the camera. The room was a dull gray color, and the table looked the same. Nikki was still in the same clothes she had on when she left the house with Jim a week ago. I thought the video was from that night. Jim was speaking softly to Nikki. She had her hands flat on the table and was looking straight ahead with no emotion on her face. After a moment, a door on the left side of the room opened. A man came in wearing gray pants and a plain white shirt without a tie. Good evening, Mrs. Hello, Anderson. I'm Detective Harris, and I will lead this interview. Before we begin, would you like some water or do you need to use the bathroom? He asked. No, I'm fine for now, Nikki replied quietly. Okay, let's start, Detective Harris said. I noticed that the video camera seemed to be behind a special mirror. It looked that way because no one in the room seemed to notice the camera. I imagined that if there was a camera in the room, it would catch the eyes of Nikki and Jim. Mrs. Anderson, let's begin with what happened in your house on Friday, August 8th. Please answer my questions honestly and with as many details as you can. This way we can resolve things quickly, Detective Harris said. Nikki replied, Sure. Now, Mrs. Anderson. Anderson, were you home when your husband was shot? Detective Harris asked. Nikki looked down, feeling sad. Yes. Who shot your husband? Detective Harris wanted to know. It was an accident, Nikki replied softly. Mrs. Anderson, Detective Harris said carefully, can you tell me what happened? Who shot your husband, Anderson? Detective Harris asked once more. John Parker, Nikki replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Who is John Parker? He's a gym teacher at my school. Where were you when your husband was shot? Detective Harris inquired. I was hiding in my closet. If you were hiding, how do you know the shooting was an accident? Detective Harris pressed. John told me what happened, Nikki explained. Okay, Mrs. Anderson, the detective continued, trying to understand the situation better. Can you share more about John Parker? Anderson, can you share what took place that afternoon? John and I were in my room upstairs when we heard the front door open, Nikki said. I knew Eric wasn't supposed to be home yet because I was going to pick him up at the airport later. So I felt really scared. I grabbed the phone to call for help, but John motioned for me to be quiet. He walked to the top of the stairs to look down. He returned to the bedroom shortly after and quietly said that someone was looking around downstairs. He told me to hide in my closet until he came back for me. How long did you stay in the closet? I'm not sure, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, Nikki replied. What happened next? I heard the loud gunshots. I was so scared. I thought someone had hurt John, and I was afraid they would find me too, Nikki said, her voice trembling. I was sitting on the floor in my closet, waiting to hear what would happen next. Suddenly, the closet door opened, and John stood there looking scared. His face was very pale. I asked him what was going on as I got to my feet. He stammered, "It was an accident. It was an accident." I walked with him to the bedroom door. He said, "I thought I saw a gun in his hand." I felt scared and shot him. I didn't understand what he meant until I looked down the stairs and saw Eric lying there. I hurried down the stairs and yelled for John to call 911, but John was just behind me on the stairs. He told me it was already too late. He said if Eric wasn't dead yet, he would be before help could get here. At that point, I was sitting at the bottom of the stairs trying to see if Eric was breathing. While I was working on that, John said, "We need to make this look like a break-in." That's when I saw Eric was still breathing. I told John I was going to call 911. He grabbed my arm and asked me to wait a few minutes while he tried to make it look like a break-in. Then he went into the family room. I could hear him making a mess in there, but I knew I couldn't wait any longer, so I called 911. I was put on hold right away. John returned to the entrance while I was still waiting for help on the phone. He asked what was going on, and I told him I was trying to call 911. He gently held my face and leaned in close, saying, "When the police arrive, tell them you came home and found Eric lying there. Don't mention anything else." I questioned him, asking why, and he replied, "The police won't believe this was just an accident. They will believe we hurt him on purpose." I was really frightened and confused. When the 911 operator answered, I told her I had come home for lunch and found Eric lying on the floor at the bottom of the stairs. It looked like he had been shot. "What did Mr. Parker do while you were on the phone?" Detective Harris asked. He just stood there and watched me until I got off the call. Then he said, "Make sure to keep to the story. If you don't help me and the police find me, you'll be in trouble too." "What did Mr. Parker say after he told you to keep quiet?" John acted oddly. He leaned down near Eric. I thought he was making sure Eric was okay. Then he whispered something in Eric's ear before he walked away, Nikki replied. "He spoke to your husband. Did you catch what he said to him?" Detective Harris asked. "I'm not sure, but I think I heard 'that's for Sarah.' I can't say for sure, though. It was really hard to hear," Nikki replied. "What do you think that could mean?" Detective Harris asked. "I have no clue," Nikki said. "Who do you think Sarah is?" Detective Harris pressed on. "I don't know. He might be talking about a girl Eric went out with in college before we started dating." "Sarah Bowden. Why do you think he mentioned Sarah Bowden?" "John once asked me if Eric knew Sarah Bowden. I noticed Detective Harris writing down Sarah Bowden's name, and he marked it with a line. "We will talk about her later," he said. "Now, I need to know about your relationship with John Parker." "What do you mean by my relationship with John Parker?" Nikki asked, sounding a bit upset. "Just what I said. How would you describe your relationship with Mr. Parker?" "John is my boss. He is a teacher at my high school." "Is that all there is to your relationship with him?" Detective Harris asked. Nikki grew nervous, and I noticed Jim placed his hand on top of hers to give her support. "What are you trying to suggest?" Nikki replied. "I'm just curious why Mr. Parker was in your room," he said. "Can you explain that?" "He came upstairs behind me," Nikki said. "Why was Mr. Is Parker at your house?" Detective Harris asked. "He came with me after lunch," Nikki replied. "So you had lunch together?" "Yes, with some of the other teachers." "I'll need the names of the other teachers who had lunch with you that day," Detective Harris said. "After lunch, why did you and Mr. Parker go to your house?" "I spilled tomato sauce on my shirt, so I went home to change," Nikki explained. "Who was driving?" "I was driving." "Was Parker with you when you got home?" "Yes." "When you arrived at your house, did you both go inside?" "Parker went upstairs with you to change your shirt?" Detective Harris asked. "He didn't go up with me," I replied. "You just said he went upstairs," Detective Harris pointed out. When we got to the house, John went to the family room while I went upstairs to change, I explained. But then he came up later? Detective Harris pressed. Yes, I admitted. Why did he do that? He wanted to show me the beer stein he got for me in Germany, Nikki said. I was shocked by what I had just learned. Parker had bought that stein for Nikki. Then she had the audacity to hand it to me as if it were a precious gift. I felt a knot in my stomach. What a nerve! Why did he bring the beer glass upstairs? The detective asked. He wanted to remind me of our evening in Germany, Nikki replied. Why do you think he went upstairs with the glass instead of waiting for you to come down? Tears were rolling down Nikki's cheeks as she spoke. I think he wanted me to be close with him, Nikki said. I felt a shiver run down my back when Nikki mentioned that Parker had followed her upstairs. It felt like my heart was racing. So, would you say your relationship with Mr. Parker is a physical one? Detective Harris asked. No, I didn't get close with him. Was that because your husband came home and stopped you? Detective Harris was starting to seem very intense, like a guard dog ready to pounce. He could smell trouble and he was ready to take action. Part of me hoped he would challenge Nikki, but another part wanted him to be kind to her. I wasn't going to be with John, Nikki said, sounding very upset. She was struggling to keep her cool. Jim leaned in close, trying to help her relax. You told us that Mr. Parker followed you upstairs to be with you, but now you say you weren't going to be with him. What's the truth, Mrs.? Did he come upstairs? Detective Harris asked. He came upstairs with that annoying beer mug and tried to convince me to be intimate with him, but I wasn't interested, Nikki replied. He was trying to convince you to be intimate? You mean he was trying to charm you? Yes. I think so, Nikki replied. Did he think you would want to be with him? Detective Harris asked. He kept bringing up what happened in Germany and how we should. Before I could hear more from Nikki, the hotel room started to shake. In less than 2 seconds, I understood we were having an earthquake. I quickly went to the doorway of the bathroom to stay safe. It felt like a pretty strong quake, maybe a 6 on the scale. The big window in the room broke and fell into the parking lot outside. A second later, the lights went out. This all happened in less than 30 seconds, but I could already hear sirens all around the city and car alarms going off everywhere in Los Angeles County. I sat down on the bed and hoped the power would come back on, but it didn't. I waited for over an hour for the power to come back on. As it started to get dark, I decided to unplug the VCR. I carried it to the front desk to ask if I could take it with me and bring it back the next day since my tape was stuck inside. When I reached the hotel lobby, I saw that they had lights on. I asked the clerk how that was possible, and he explained that they used an emergency generator. I asked him if I could take the VCR with me. He said I couldn't do that. Instead, he suggested we plug the VCR into an outlet that the generator powered. Then I could take the tape out. 5 minutes later, I was in the Honda with the tape on my way home. I really hoped there would be power when I arrived. I called Tony to let him know where I was going and why. He told me he needed to talk and that he would meet me at my house in about 30 minutes. When I arrived at the house, it was very dark outside. There was no moon that night, and the electricity was out across the city. Without the streetlights, I could hardly see my house from the driveway when I turned off the car's headlights. I grabbed the videotape from the front seat of the car and walked to the front door. It was very dark, and I kept stepping off the sidewalk, almost twisting my ankle a few times. When I reached the front door, I had to kneel down to try to put the key in the lock. It was so dark that I thought it might be easier to close my eyes while I did it. And surprisingly, it worked. When I opened the door and walked in, I noticed it was even darker inside. I raised my hand in front of my face, but I could not see it at all. I remembered there was a strong flashlight in the kitchen pantry. I just needed to make my way through the small entrance and down the hallway to the kitchen. It was about 15 feet away. Then I would turn right for another 6 feet, and I would reach the pantry door. Usually I could cross that space in 5 or 6 seconds, but in the dark, I was moving really slowly. When I was a kid, I was never scared of the dark, but this time, the darkness was deeper than anything I had ever felt. After about 30 seconds of carefully moving my feet and pressing my shoulder against the wall, I finally reached the doorway that led into the kitchen. I'm not sure why I paused, but when I did, I felt a shiver run down my spine and my arms. It took me a moment to realize what had caused this fear. It was a smell. As soon as I reached the kitchen doorway, the strong, sour scent of body odor hit me. For a second, I wondered if it was me who smelled bad. But then I noticed the other smell. It was the smell of whiskey. Someone else was in the house, but who could it be? Was someone using the power outage to break in, or was it something worse? I considered the options and decided I didn't trust coincidences. I thought it couldn't be a thief. It had to be Parker. I stood still, trying to hear any sound that might tell me where he was. He could be right in front of me or even behind me. I really wished Parker couldn't see in the dark better than I could. I hoped the lights would stay off until I found a way to leave the house without bumping into him. After thinking about my few choices, I figured my best chance was to go to the pantry. If I could grab the flashlight, I could point it in Parker's eyes to make him squint, and then I could use it to protect myself. I was pretty sure Parker had a gun, otherwise I didn't think he would have come to the house. I couldn't figure out why he would come after me. I let my breath out slowly, then took a deep breath in just as slowly. I wanted to stay quiet. I stepped into the kitchen, keeping my back against the wall. I moved with small steps toward the pantry door. I paused every little bit to listen carefully. I couldn't hear him, but I could feel he was there with me. After what felt like a long time, I finally got to the pantry door. Now I had to move away from the wall to open it. I started to feel panic rising in me. I had been taking tiny breaths to stay quiet, but now I felt like I wasn't getting enough air. I wanted to take a deep breath, but I was too scared to do it. This made my panic even worse. I wanted to scream and run away from the house, but I couldn't move. I stayed still for a moment, then slowly stepped forward with my right foot, followed by my left. I was about to take another step when I noticed him. We hadn't really touched, but I could feel his warmth nearby. I felt confused. Did Parker realize I was so close to him? I could smell his breath, and his body odor was so strong that it made my eyes water. I thought about whether I should back away fast or try to hit him hard, hoping it would give me a chance to escape the house. Before I could decide what to do, I felt his hand glide gently along my cheek. "Hello, Eric," Parker said in the most frightening voice I had ever heard. I knew right away that Parker had only touched me to see where I was, so he could aim at me. Without thinking, I pushed him away with all my strength and stepped to the right. I must have surprised him because he stumbled back just as he pulled the trigger. The bright flash made me go blind for a moment, and the loud sound hurt my ears, but the bullet didn't hit me. I turned around fast and saw the door to the pantry. I opened it and stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. As I stood there, I looked for the flashlight while Parker fired 2 more shots in the kitchen. I spotted a big, strong flashlight on the top shelf of the pantry and grabbed it. I pressed myself into the corner as much as I could. If Parker opened the pantry door, I wanted to make sure I wasn't in his way. I leaned against the wall, keeping my left hand on the edge of the door to know where I was. I thought that if Parker came in, I would use the flashlight to defend myself. It was quiet for a moment, and then Parker started talking to me. "Eric, why are you making this so hard? I've been waiting a long time for this night. Why don't you just give in and face what is coming like a man?" he said. I thought about calling out to him and asking what he meant, but I knew he wasn't in the mood for a chat. He wanted to end me. "Come on, Eric. 1 shot and it's all over. Then I can go find Nicole and we can celebrate your end together," he said. "You know, I've been close to her for more than a year now." I understood what Parker was trying to do. He wanted to make me so mad that I would say or do something to show him where I was hiding. It was working. I was really struggling to keep my anger in check. Just then I felt the pantry door move. It wasn't opening. It was pushing inward. He must have been leaning against it. "Okay, Eric, where are you?" he called out in a teasing tone. "I bet you didn't know that Nicole visited my hotel room while we were in Germany last year. She told me she wanted to be close to me. We had a great time together. And the next day, I surprised her with a nice beer mug as a gift. We shared some fun moments during that trip, and it made the experience unforgettable." His words definitely had an impact on me. The only good thing was that his words showed he was leaning against the pantry door. "While I was with Nicole the day before you were set to return from Dallas, she asked me to get rid of you so we could be together," he said. "I had planned to do it when she picked you up at the airport that night, but you came home early. Oh well, sometimes things don't go as planned." I guess Nicole and I will have to leave the country tonight after I finish you off. At that moment, my anger took control. I took a deep breath and then rushed at the door with all my might. The door swung open and pushed Parker ahead. I ran into him from behind. Our speed sent us crashing into the dining set, and Parker lost his balance, tipping over one of the chairs with me clinging to him. We fell to the ground with a thud. I thought I heard the gun slide across the floor, but it was too dark for me to see. All I knew was that I had to find a way to overpower him. I didn't realize how strong he was until I was on top of him. The fall had startled Parker, giving me a chance to get the upper hand. I switched the flashlight to my left hand and then slipped my arm under his right shoulder. I managed to position my hand behind his head. His right arm was stuck. I forgot he was left-handed. As I leaned to the left and gripped his right arm tighter, he suddenly lifted his left elbow and hit me hard on the side of my head. For a second, I thought I might black out. I knew if I lost consciousness, I might not wake up again. While I waited for my head to stop spinning, I noticed his body was tightening. I realized he was getting ready to swing his elbow at me again. I lifted the flashlight and swung it down as hard as I could, aiming for his arm. A loud noise echoed as the flashlight hit him, and Parker screamed in pain. I was scared about how badly I might have hurt him, so I wasn't going to stop. I raised the flashlight again and swung it down once more. This time, when it hit, the flashlight slipped from my grip and slid across the floor. Parker let out another loud cry, then he became quiet. I could feel his breaths change from sharp and quick to steady. I started to think I had somehow made him faint, but then he said something. "You will regret that, Eric," he said. "I'm going to hurt you badly before I finish you off, and then I'll give a part of you to Nicole. When she sees it, she will know you're gone. That will make her very happy." I felt anger rising inside me, but it was draining my energy. I started to understand what was happening. I knew that if I didn't stay calm, I wouldn't be ready for Parker's next action. Since Parker seemed to be resting for a moment, I took the chance to unclip my cell phone from my belt and turn it on. The light from the screen helped me see that Parker was lying down with his face turned to the right. His left arm was flat on the floor. I couldn't see if his arm was hurt or if he was just waiting for the right time to get up and move again. In just a few seconds, I found Tony's number and pressed the speed dial. Tony answered on the third ring. "Tony, Parker is in the house with me." "Come on," I said, not waiting for Tony to answer. "You won't get help in time to save yourself," Parker said. "By this time tomorrow, Nicole and I will be enjoying the beach in Rio, drinking sweet drinks and laughing about how weak you are. I want to make you cry before it's over so I can tell Nicole what a coward you were." In that instant, an idea hit me. I realized what his plan was, and I thought maybe I could turn things around on him. It was a risk, but I had to give it a shot. I leaned in close to his ear and whispered, "You know, John, Sarah told me she didn't want to be with you because she heard you weren't good enough. She said she liked me instead." That seemed to really upset him. "Don't talk about Sarah," he warned me, angry. "Sarah said that people called you Jingle Bells because you weren't very impressive," I replied. "You're going to pay for that," he said, fuming. "You're finished. Do you understand? Finished?" In the glow from my phone, I could see that Parker was nearly spitting with anger as he said that last part. I started to feel unsure if my previous plan was really a smart choice. For a moment, everything was quiet, and then the screen on my phone went dark, leaving us in total blackness. That's when Parker acted. In an instant, he dropped to his knees, and I was holding on with all my might. Parker somehow managed to stand up and turned in a circle. I lost my hold and was tossed across the room. I realized I should try to escape, but it was dark, and I didn't know where I was, so I had no idea which way to go. I sat down on the floor, trying to be as quiet as possible. I listened for any sounds from Parker. After a few seconds, I heard him. It sounded like he was moving his hand back and forth on the floor, searching for his gun. I began to glide across the floor, trying to figure out where I was in the room. I kept moving until my back pressed against a wall. As I ran my hand along the bottom edge of the wall to see where I was, I accidentally touched the spring stop for the pantry door. Now I understood my location, but sadly, my hand had bent the spring stop, and it suddenly snapped out of my grip with a loud twang. I don't know if I will ever really understand what happened in the next few moments. I knew the sound from the doorstop had given away where I was hiding, and Parker would know I was close. Before I could react, there was a loud noise as Parker shot in my direction. The bullet struck the wall just above me, and I felt pieces of the wall fall down on me. I thought he might believe I was standing up, but the bright flash from the gun would have shown him I was actually sitting on the floor. I was scared that the next shot would hit me. My ears were ringing from the first shot, making it hard to hear other sounds. I heard someone shouting, and I guessed it was Parker calling out to me again. Just then, Parker appeared in a bright light. Now I could see Parker sitting on the floor looking at me. He was only about 7 feet away from me when he lifted his gun and aimed it in my direction. I heard some shouting, followed by 3 loud bangs. Parker seemed to fall backward. I looked at Parker lying on the ground, and a pool of blood began to spread beside him. As I started to understand what had happened, I turned my head to the right and was suddenly struck by 3 bright lights. A police officer in uniform, holding a flashlight, walked over to Parker. He kicked Parker's gun away and felt for a pulse at his neck. "He's still alive, sir," the officer reported. Then another officer began speaking into his radio. I felt confused when Tony Trenka sat down beside me. "Are you okay, Eric?" he asked. "Did you get hurt?" "No, he missed," I replied. "But I don't think he would miss again." "Thanks for helping me out. Which one of you fired at him?" "We all did," Tony replied. By the time they took Parker away in an ambulance, I had already shared what happened with 3 different detectives. Each one told me how lucky I was afterward. Of course, I knew that. After most of the other officers left, Tony and I sat down in the living room to chat. I looked at Tony and asked, "I don't get it. Why did he suddenly want to harm me?" "It was like an obsession. He believed you took something that was his and he wanted payback," Tony explained. "This wasn't about Nikki, right?" "No, he was using her to reach you," Tony replied. "Sarah Bowden?" "Yes. Her name came up a few times when your wife was asking questions, so I found her. She's Mrs. Cooper now. She is married and lives in Phoenix. I spoke with her on the phone just before I arrived here." "What did she say?" I asked. "I asked Mrs. Cooper if she knew you, and she said yes. She told me the same story you shared about how you met and that you went on 3 dates but decided it wasn't working out. Then I asked her about John Parker." She stayed silent for a bit, so I had to ask her again to get her to reply. "She told me that John Parker was the man she was with the night you first saw her at the gas station. She said after that night she didn't see him for a few months and then he called her. He apologized to her for how he acted. He gave a long speech about his regrets and then asked if he could come to her apartment to talk for a bit. She made the mistake of believing he meant what he said and let him come over. When Parker arrived, he acted like a true gentleman at first, but then, out of the blue, he expressed how upset he was that she had left him that night. He said to her that she belonged to him, and nothing would change that. She then accused him of trying to force himself on her. She managed to escape from him and grabbed her phone, ready to call 911. Mr. Parker told her to go ahead and make the call. He said he would simply tell the police that they were about to get close when she suddenly decided she didn't want to anymore. Since there had been no actual contact, the police might side with him and she could get in trouble for making a false report. Mrs. Cooper understood that showing proof would be hard. All she wanted was for him to leave her apartment. As he was walking out, Mr. Parker warned her. He said he would handle her boyfriend and if he saw them together, he would hurt them both. Mrs. Cooper explained that she wasn't seeing anyone at that time. She thought Mr. Parker was saying he didn't want her to date anyone at all. She told me that if she had realized the danger was aimed at you, she would have warned you. It didn't cross her mind since you two had broken up over a month before she met Mr. Parker. Mrs. Cooper mentioned that Mr. Parker began calling her a few times each week, so she decided to leave school and move to Phoenix without telling anyone where she was going. "And he never tracked her down in Phoenix?" I asked. "No. Only one person at USC knew where Mrs. Cooper went after she left school in the middle of the semester, and Mr. Parker was not aware of it. I found that friend, and through her, I was able to reach Mrs. Cooper's parents. They helped me connect with her. I hope Parker stays in prison for a long time. I would be scared if he tried to find me when he gets out," I said. "I don't think you will ever hear from Mr. Parker again. It's very unlikely he will recover from his injuries. He looked like he was in a deep sleep when he left here. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. I didn't feel happy, but maybe a little relieved. "Sorry, my friend, but your house is a crime scene again," Tony said. "You'll have to keep everything as it is until we finish. It won't take long. Internal Affairs will come by in the morning. They need to check after an officer is involved in a shooting. In this case, 3 officers were involved. You should have your house back by noon tomorrow." "Can I stay here tonight?" I asked. "I don't want to go find a hotel right now." "I think that's okay. Just don't touch anything in the kitchen until the investigation is done," Tony said. "I won't touch anything, I just want to sleep." "Did you finish watching the video?" Tony asked. "No. The earthquake stopped me." "Oh, right, you did mention that. Just promise me you won't tell anyone I gave you that copy. And after you watch it, please get rid of it. Throw it away or record something else over it," Tony said. "What will happen to Nikki?" I asked. "I'm not sure," Tony replied. "That depends on the DA's office. I wasn't there when your wife was asked questions, and I haven't seen the tape of her interview yet. I planned to check it last week, but I couldn't find the time. She did cooperate." "If she tells the truth and they believe her, she might not get in trouble," Tony said. We both got up, and Tony added, "I should leave now. I'll tell you if I find out anything about your wife, good or bad." I walked Tony to the door. "Thanks, Tony. I guess I owe you a drink," I replied. "At least 2 drinks," Tony said as he stepped outside. Now I was alone in my living room thinking about what Parker had told me. Was any of it true? I had already heard Nikki say that Parker bought the beer stein for her, so he was telling the truth about that. But did Nikki get close to him while they were in Germany? Did he really charm her into being with him to come after me? It was tough for me to believe that Nikki would do something like that. But I knew Nikki had not been honest with me about the stein. How many other lies had she told me? I thought about finishing the video, but I felt too tired. I decided to watch it the next day instead. That night, I slept poorly. My dreams were filled with memories from the last 3 weeks. Some were real moments, while others were scary images created by my biggest fears and worries. I woke up on Friday morning to the sound of my doorbell ringing. I put on a robe and went downstairs to open the door. 2 men stood at the door. They wore simple brown suits. For a brief moment, I thought about where they might have gotten their suits, just like Tony's when I first met him. The men said they were detectives from Internal Affairs. They explained they were there to check the area where the shooting happened. One of them asked me if I or anyone else had touched anything in the kitchen since the shooting. I told them that no one had been in the kitchen since the investigators left the night before. They asked me to share what had happened. After they finished asking me questions about the shooting, I went back upstairs to take a shower while they wrapped up their investigation in the kitchen. When I returned downstairs, the 2 IAD officers were ready to go. They said they were finished, and I could now clean up the mess. After they left, I called the same company that helped clean up the mess in my foyer. They said they couldn't come until afternoon on Monday. I told them that was fine and made the appointment. By 11 a.m., the power was back on in parts of the city, and luckily, that included most of Sherman Oaks. With the lights on, I decided to brew a pot of coffee and finish watching Nikki's interview. I looked around the kitchen, but I couldn't find the videotape anywhere. I tried to remember what I did with the tape when I came home the night before, but I just couldn't. I went out to the car, but it wasn't there either. Then I thought that the IAD guys might have found the tape in the kitchen and taken it. There was no label on the tape, so unless they played it on my VCR, they wouldn't know what was on it. Did I drop the tape when I pushed Parker? If the IAD team found it on the kitchen floor, they might have thought it was important. The truth was, the tape was gone and there was nothing I could do. I had to tell Tony so he could protect himself. I didn't want him to get in trouble for giving me a copy of Nikki's questioning. Without the tape to help me, I felt stuck. I felt very lonely. I wanted Nikki to come home with me. I missed her a lot, and I wondered if we would ever be together again. Then some of the things Parker had told me started to bother me. How could Nikki have been connected to this man? I began to think that none of this would have happened if Nikki hadn't been involved with Parker somehow. It didn't matter if she had only spent a little time with him while they were in Germany or if it had gone on even after they came back. Our marriage was finished. I could hardly believe that Nikki wanted me gone. I just couldn't accept it. I was feeling really upset, so I thought my coffee could use a little kick. I walked to the pantry to grab my bourbon. As I walked by, I spotted the bloodstain on the floor. For a second, it felt like I saw Parker's face looking at me from that dark red spot. I felt a chill run through me, so I quickly turned and opened the pantry door. I still felt a chill run down my back as I looked at the golden liquid in the bottle. For the first time, I thought aloud, I hope that guy is gone. I caught sight of the shelf where the flashlight had been the night before. Oh, right. I remember now, I told myself. Then I turned to check if the flashlight was still lying on the floor. It wasn't there. I suppose that was seen as proof. The rest of the day, I thought hard about everything I knew, trying to decide what to do about Nikki. Later that evening, Tony came over to pick up the 2 drinks I owed him. He told me that John Parker stayed in a coma until 12:45 p.m. when he finally passed away. I poured Tony another drink because it was clear he needed it. He was trying to seem calm, but I could see that ending a life, even if it was for a good reason, was a hard weight for Tony to bear. We talked about how he felt about the shooting, even though he said he didn't want to share any of it. Then he delivered the other news he had for me. I spoke with the assistant DA, Tony said. She told me they won't charge your wife. Anderson worked well with the investigation, and they felt she wasn't really involved in the plans against you by Mr. Parker. I was happy that Nikki was free from that trouble, but I still needed to figure out what to do about Nikki. Tony shared more about his talk with the assistant DA. He explained why they chose not to charge Nikki. As I listened to Tony, I started to feel something unusual inside me. As I sat there, it felt like I was getting lighter. One part of my mind focused on what Tony was saying, while another part wondered what I should do about my marriage. By 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, I was driving my Honda to Nikki's parents' house. George greeted me at the door and asked how I was doing. Then he took me into the living room where Mary and Nikki were sitting. "We saw what happened on the news last night," Mary said. "That must have been hard for you." Nikki began to cry and asked, "Why didn't you call us yesterday and tell us what happened?" "I'm sorry. I should have called, but yesterday was a tough day and I just didn't feel like talking to anyone," I said, even though it wasn't entirely true. I just wasn't ready to talk to Nikki. I watched Nikki closely to see how she would react. Then I told her, "Did you know that Parker passed away from his injuries?" Nikki looked down at her hands and shook her head. Tears filled her eyes again. George spoke up. "Yes, it was on the news last night. There is no sadness for him in this house." Nikki looked at me and said, "I am not crying for him, Eric. I am crying because of what he did to us." "I don't understand why a man would act like that," Mary said. "Eric, did you know that the DA's office called yesterday? They said they won't charge Nikki with anything." I glanced at Nikki. "Yes, I heard. That's great news," I replied. Nikki smiled at me but stayed quiet. "Mary, I just want to say how much I appreciate your help and support during this tough time," I said. Looking at Nikki, I said, "This has been hard for all of us." Nikki stood up from the couch and came closer to me. She looked right at me and asked, "Can I come with you?" "No, I can't go home," I replied. "Not going home? Where are you going?" Nikki asked, her eyes wide with surprise. "I need to take Charlie's car back to his place in Las Vegas," I explained. I could see Nikki was starting to tear up again, but she tried to stay strong. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Charlie lives in Sherman Oaks. Why do you need to take his car to Las Vegas?" Nikki asked. I held her face gently and looked into her kind eyes. "I'll tell you everything on the way to Las Vegas," I answered. Nikki was drying her tears when she asked, "Do you want me to join you in Vegas?" I leaned in and gave Nikki a soft kiss on her forehead. "Of course, I want you to come with me," I replied. Nikki smiled and hugged me warmly. "George, I need a little help. I have some folks coming to clean the kitchen on Monday. Can you watch the house while they're there?" "No problem. What time should I arrive?" "About noon," I said. "If you don't mind, Nikki and I need to head out now." George and Mary walked us to the door, and it was clear they were both smiling happily. They were glad to see Nikki and me together again. "We should go back to the house so I can get some clothes," Nikki said as we walked to the car. "I already packed everything you'll need," I replied. "So you knew you were bringing me with you before you got here?" she asked. "You are my wife. You are the one I love. Why would I go anywhere without you? I replied. Nikki pulled me close and gave me a kiss on the lips. You're the man I love. For the first 45 minutes of the trip, Nikki did not say much. She just sat quietly, smiling. When we got to the point where I-10 meets I-15, Nikki started to talk. Did you pack my clothes? What did you bring? She asked. I also packed your sandals and the black heels that match your cocktail dress. I also put all your makeup in a bag. If you need anything else, you'll have to buy it yourself. Nikki kissed me on the cheek and we started chatting like we always do. After some time, Nikki leaned back and looked more at ease, but I began to notice a change in the mood. I noticed that Nikki was looking sadder, so I decided to ask her what was bothering her. Eric, I'm really sorry about everything. I need to explain so you know I love you and that nothing ever happened between John and me. I'm scared you might not trust me anymore. If that's the case, it could hurt our relationship. Please feel free to ask me anything you want. I'll tell you anything you want, so please just talk to me, I said. I have one question I really need to ask. It's important, so I want to hear the truth, I continued. Nikki looked at me. I promise to be honest no matter what you ask, he replied. All right then. Nikki, did you? Nikki shook his head no before I could finish my thought. Did you break the beer stein? I asked. Nikki kept shaking his head as I spoke. No. Wait. What? Yes, I really did, she replied. That's not what I expected you to ask. Of course. Do you want to know why I did it? Nikki asked. No, I already figured it out, I said. Nikki looked at me, her eyes full of questions. Nikki, I love you and I trust you completely. I have all the answers I need to move forward. We don't need to talk about this anymore, at least not until we get back home next week. I just want to enjoy being together for the next few days, I said as I held Nikki's hand gently. Nikki smiled happily all the way to Charlie's house. When we arrived, I quickly checked to see if there were any signs that Parker had come into the house the night I left Vegas. I couldn't find any signs that Parker had been there. I started to wonder if he had seen me when I left that night. He knew what I looked like, so he might have seen me when we walked by each other. When we entered the house, Nikki looked around and said, "This is way better than staying at one of those cheap hotels." As Nikki showed herself around the house, I took out 2 cold Heineken beers from the refrigerator. Nikki was in the main bedroom looking out at the pool in the backyard when I gave her a beer. Do you want to change into your swimsuit and go for a swim? I asked. Yes, but first, I want us to get comfortable together, she said. I appreciated Nikki's honesty. We stood facing each other and started to change. When I took off my shirt and Nikki saw my scars, she started to cry. I quickly went to her and hugged her tightly until she felt better. I kissed her a few times and told her that everything would be fine. It's just that when I see those marks, I can't help but feel like it's my fault, Nikki said. Nikki, listen to me, I replied. You didn't cause what Parker did. The reason he tried to hurt me had nothing to do with you. Nikki looked at me with doubt. Parker was fixated on Sarah Bowden. He was angry with me ever since I helped her escape from him the night I first met her. I didn't know him, and I didn't know about his fixation until a few days ago. I will share the full story later, but for now, I want you to understand that what happened to me wasn't your fault. It was all Parker's doing. If he hadn't hurt me that day on the stairs, he would have done it another time, and it might have been worse. Let's just enjoy each other and take our minds off John Parker for a bit, I said. Are you sure you're okay with this? Nikki asked. I almost lost you once. I really don't want anything bad to happen. You will need all your strength to handle the love I am going to show you. I'm ready to take the chance. Let's see what you can do, I said, and then kissed Nikki. Nikki paused for a moment and looked into my eyes. She said, Eric, I love you. That was wonderful, but if you want to impress me, you'll have to do even better. The day is still young, so you better be ready, Nikki replied with a smile. We spent the rest of the day relaxing by the pool, and that evening, Nikki cooked dinner with the groceries I had bought the weekend before. It was just spaghetti with ragu sauce and a bottle of red wine, but we turned it into a special dinner. That night we shared closeness and then sat up in bed, looking out at the bright lights from the strip as we talked quietly. Epilogue. Think many of you are curious about how I learned to trust Nikki again. Was I ignoring the bad things that could happen? No. Let me tell you what happened. After the people from IAD left the house on Friday, you might recall that I wanted to make my coffee a bit stronger. I went to the pantry to grab the bourbon. As I reached for it, I noticed the shelf where the flashlight used to be. The flashlight was gone, but instead, I found the videotape of Nikki's interview at the police station. So, while I sipped my bourbon and coffee, I watched the rest of the video. When I put the tape in my VCR and pressed play, it started right after the last part I remembered. I rewound it a bit and hit play again. Detective Harris asked, "He was trying to convince you to get close with him? You mean he was trying to win you over?" "Yes, I guess so," Nikki said. "Did he think you would be open to being with him?" Detective Harris asked. "He kept bringing up what happened in Germany and how we should finish what we started that night." "Mrs. Anderson, can you tell me what happened between you and Mr. Parker in Germany?" Nikki talked to Jim for a moment and then said, "We went to Germany as guides for the German club. The club members were invited to Germany by a school in Munich. Our students lived with the families of the students from the school we visited. The 7 chaperones stayed at a nearby hotel. On our last full day there, we took the students shopping for souvenirs. I was looking in the window of a store that sold many kinds of items. At first, I looked at the Hummels. I had always wanted to start collecting them, but they are very pricey. Next to the Hummels, I saw a German beer mug. As soon as I noticed it, I knew Eric would love it." "Why would your husband like the mug?" Detective Harris asked. "Eric has a small collection of beer mugs and steins, but he doesn't have one as nice as the one I saw in the store window." "All right, go on. I could see the price tag on the mug, and I figured it would cost more than $100. Just then, John came over and asked me what I was looking at. I told him I liked the beer mug, but it was too pricey. After that, we gathered the students and took them back to the school to meet their hosts. That evening, the group leaders were invited to dinner by some of the teachers at our host school. As I was getting ready to go out, John came to my room. He said he had a surprise for me and handed me a box that was not wrapped. Inside the box was the beer mug I had been thinking about. I told John that I couldn't take such a pricey gift, but he insisted. He said it was a thank you for all the help I gave him as he got used to our school. Part of me felt I shouldn't take the gift, but part of me really wanted it because I knew Eric would love it. I thanked John and we went to meet the other helpers in the hotel lobby. We had dinner at a place close to the hotel. After that, our hosts took us to a real beer house. A band was playing lively music, and our host began to show us how to do some German folk dances. We were having a blast, and I enjoyed my drinks a little too much. By the time we left to go back to our hotel, I was feeling quite happy. John held my arm as we walked. I thought he was just making sure I wouldn't trip on the cobblestone sidewalk. When we got back to the hotel, John took me to my room. As I opened the door, he stepped closer and kissed me. I was surprised and didn't know how to respond, so he kissed me again. For a moment, I kissed him back, but then I realized what was happening and gently pulled away. I told him that what he did was not okay, and I should never have allowed him to kiss me again. He said he wanted me, and thought I wanted him too. I told him he was mistaken, then I pushed him back into the hallway and shut my door. Was that the end of it? Did Mr. Parker leave you alone after that? Detective Harris asked. Pretty much. The next day, John said he was sorry for what he did and said it was because he had too much to drink the night before. He acted appropriately for the rest of the time. So, you didn't do anything with Mr. Parker? No, I have never been with Mr. Parker. I love my husband, and I have never been unfaithful to him, and I never will be. When you got home, what did your husband say about the beer mug that Mr. Parker gave you? I didn't tell Eric that John gave it to me. I said that I bought it for him. Seeing how much Eric loved the stein made me happy, but then I realized I had just lied to him for the first time since we got married. I started to cry. I almost told him the truth right then. Now I wish I had. After the trip, did Parker try to ask you out or suggest something more with you? Detective Harris asked. He would flirt with me sometimes, but he never crossed any big lines, she replied. What do you mean by big lines? He inquired. Well, the flirting wasn't right, but it wasn't really offensive, she explained. He never asked me to go out or anything like that, and he never mentioned anything intimate, at least not until the day of the incident. Why do you call it an incident? John wouldn't have hurt Eric on purpose. He hurt Eric by mistake. Mrs. Anderson, the shooting wasn't a mistake. Mr. Parker knew your husband. He had enough time to see him on the stairs before he shot him. There is no way Mr. Parker didn't notice that your husband was taking his bags upstairs and he didn't have a gun with him. No, that's not true. He wouldn't do that on purpose, Nikki exclaimed. Mrs. Anderson, when you were in the closet, did you hear the gunshots? Yes. Can you tell me what you heard? Detective Harris asked. The first shot was really loud, and then a few seconds later the next two shots were not as loud, Nikki replied. Do you know why there was a pause between the first shot and the last two? No. I didn't really think about it. Mr. Parker stood at the top of the stairs until your husband got to the landing and turned to face him. Detective Harris said. Then, Mr. Parker shot your husband in the chest. Mr. Anderson fell down the stairs and landed on his suitcase. After that, Mr. Parker walked down the stairs and stood over him. He shot him 2 more times in the stomach. It was clear from Mr. Parker's wanted your husband to die, and he wanted it to happen slowly and painfully. Nikki put her head down on the table, crying hard. Jim helped her sit up and wrapped his arms around her, saying soft words to comfort her. After a moment, he asked if someone could get Nikki a glass of water. Detective Harris let Nikki take a moment to gather herself while they waited for the water. Now, Mrs. Anderson, can you think of any reason why Mr. Parkers would want to harm your husband? Parker wants to hurt your husband? Detective Harris asked. Nikki shook her head. I can't believe he would do that, and I have no idea why he would. Is there anything else you can share that might help us understand why Mr. Parker would want to hurt your husband? I can't think of much, but now I'm starting to wonder if this is about Sarah Bowden, Nikki said. Why do you think this is connected to Miss Bowden? I'm not sure. While we were in Germany, John asked me to talk to Eric and see if he remembered Sarah Bowden, but he didn't tell me why I should ask. Did you ask your husband about Sarah Bowden? Yes. He said he went out with her a few times in his junior year of college, Nikki replied. Did you believe your husband? Yes. Did you tell your husband that Mr. Parker wanted to know about Sarah? Detective Harris asked. No. Why not? I don't know. Have you seen Mr. Parker? Parker since the shooting? Detective Harris asked. Yes. He was at school and he visited the hospital one day. He came to the hospital? Why? He said he needed to talk to me and wanted to know how Eric was doing. What did he want to talk about? Detective Harris asked. He wanted to make sure I hadn't told anyone what really happened, Nikki said. Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. I think we are finished here for now, Detective Harris said. We might want to talk to you again, so please let us know before you plan to leave town. Detective Harris stepped away from the table and walked to a phone on the wall. He picked it up and spoke to someone, but I couldn't hear their conversation. After he hung up, he turned to Jim. Mr. Culkin, could we have a quick chat? Detective Harris asked. Jim and Detective Harris leaned in close in the corner for a bit. Then Jim led Nikki out of the room. Right after that, the screen turned black and then filled with static. Watching the tape helped lift my spirits a bit, but I still wondered if Nikki had been dishonest. I was unsure about what to do next with her. That evening, Tony stopped by for a drink and shared that the DA's office wouldn't be pressing any charges against Nikki. When I asked him why, Tony explained that the assistant DA believed Nikki had been honest in answering all their questions. I asked Tony how they could think Nikki was telling the truth. Detective Harris asked your friend Jim if Nikki would be okay taking a lie detector test. Jim said he would talk to Nikki and let him know. The next day, Jim called Detective Harris and said Nikki agreed to take the test, Tony explained. During the test, they looked at her answers to all the questions they asked her. They also asked if she had told the truth. They asked her questions in many different ways to be sure about her answers. Your wife promised she told the truth, and the lie detector showed she was honest. There was nothing in her test that said she lied during the first interview. Nikki is a smart girl, and I knew there was no way she could trick a lie detector. So I felt sure I knew the truth. Nikki did not have a relationship with John Parker and did not like him that way. Parker had given her a beer stein to try to win her over, but Nikki put a stop to that quickly, even though she had been drinking a lot. I found it strange that the beer stein was the only thing broken when Parker tried to pretend that robbers had been in our house. Nikki said that Parker took the stein upstairs to remind her that he had bought it for her. He then tried to convince her to be intimate with him based on how things had been in Germany. He seemed to believe that since she had allowed him to kiss her before, it meant she might want to take things further with him. I changed his plans that afternoon when I walked into the house at that moment. I started to think that Nikki believed she made everything worse by accepting that stein from Parker as a gift. I thought she broke the stein on the fireplace because she did not want to keep remembering what happened and felt guilty. That was the one question I needed Nikki to answer. If she broke the stein, then everything was fine. If Parker had broken it, I would have had some doubts. Hey, audience! If you liked this video and want to keep up with more thrilling stories, make sure to subscribe to Prince Cheating Tales and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on our upcoming adventures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next wonderful story.